My friend showed me this tour thing, and now he's missing. If I'd known what would happen after checking this out, I would have never agreed to go to Dave's house. It was 1:15 to midnight and I had work tomorrow morning, but the way he urged me to come over piqued my interest. Alex, bro, I think I discovered the best thing ever. Come check this shit out. That was all it took. Okay, I know. It doesn't take much for me to get hooked on something. I jumped in the car and headed over to his house in the middle of the night. When I got there, he was sitting on his front porch in the dark. His dog Ruffles was rolling around on the ground in the grass. Hey dude, glad to see you. Come on, let me show you this, Dave said. I nodded and gave Ruffles a scratch or two behind the ears, then followed him. We went inside and he grabbed 2 cans of Miller Lite from the fridge, tossing one to me. I followed him into the computer room and we sat down at his desk. He unlocked the desktop and what I could see was normal at first. Recycle bin, Microsoft Edge, all the basic stuff that comes with a computer nowadays. But then I saw it, a little purple icon. Poor, I said aloud. Dave chuckled. Poor indeed, my friendo. He double-clicked the icon and we were greeted by a white web browser. It almost looked as if it was a cut and paste Chrome. I glanced at Dave. Dude, you dragged me all the way out here to show me a new browser? He only shook his head and proceeded to copy and paste a string of letters and numbers into the web bar. In a matter of seconds, a page popped up showing various drugs, guns, and even an ad for a hitman. Okay, what the fuck, Dave? This isn't funny. So what? I can go watch YouTube and get all this same stuff. Dave glanced at me and smiled. He cracked his knuckles and went back to scrolling through the site. We can buy a shit ton of drugs off this website. It says it's only $50 for some mushrooms and shit, he said. Want to throw down and go half? I chuckled nervously. Bro, you're joking, right? I asked. He shrugged and continued clicking away, adding various drugs to the cart. MDMA, cocaine, ecstasy. The total kept going higher and higher. Finally, he got to a point and I think he was pretty satisfied with his shopping, and the final number was around $550. David, what the fuck? I muttered as I watched him enter his card info. He didn't even glance up from the screen as I watched him enter his address into the fields. Finally, he pressed submit and the screen went black. We both sat and stared at our reflections in the darkness before it finally lit back up. We were looking at something or someone in a room. Text that looked like it was straight out of Cosmic Sand scrolled across the screen and said, "Thank you for your purchase. A representative will be with you soon." Dave looked at me. Well, that was simple. Now we wait. We're gonna get so fucked up at this party next weekend. I was pissed. He had me drive here to watch him buy drugs off the internet, per Dave's usual. I'm out, shithead, I scoffed. Thanks for wasting my night. See you in the office tomorrow. With that, I got up and left. The drive home was quiet and I didn't get any apologizes from Dave. No text, no call. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and at some point I fell asleep. I got to work at 7:48 a.m., 12 minutes before I was supposed to clock in. I grabbed my morning coffee and sat at my desk and logged into our chat service. Okay, Martha, here. Kyle, here. Brian, here, unfortunately. Dave. Where the hell is he? I couldn't find him anywhere in the one-line menu. Oh well, he's probably running late again because he drank too much last night. I can't wait to tell him he ordered $500 worth of drugs that he probably won't ever see. The day went by as normal except no Dave. He never called, never texted me, or anyone for that matter. When I got off work, I headed over to his place immediately. It was a 45-minute drive from our office to his house. I never did this unless I was worried about him. When I pulled into Dave's driveway, I knew something was wrong right away. It was 8:22 p.m. He should be home, especially considering he didn't come to work today. The lights were off and his dog was nowhere to be seen. Ruffles was normally in the yard on a stake every night, and where was his car? My stomach tightened and I got out of my car. I pulled my phone out and dialed Dave's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. The number you are trying to reach has been disconnected. Please redial and try again. What? How could that even be possible? He just got that damn phone. I walked up to his front door and peeked inside. The house was pitch black. I couldn't see anything aside from some old bread he'd left sitting out on the kitchen table. I was about to knock when I realized the front door was unlocked. I turned the handle and the door creaked open. I stepped inside and gently called out, "Hey Dave, it's Alex. Just doing a little wellness check, bro." No answer. "Ruffles? Ruffles? Come here, boy," I called out. Nothing. No collar clanging around, no claws on tile. But the smell, my God. I thought something had crawled in from the outside and died under the porch. It reeked of metal, almost like if I shoved a penny or two up my nose. I walked deeper into the house. The smell only got stronger as I got closer to the computer room. I couldn't find Dave or his dog anywhere. It was like he just packed his stuff and left. I finally approached the computer room and grabbed the doorknob. At this point, I was overwhelmed by this metallic sewage stench. My stomach knotted, and I felt my lunch from earlier start boiling. I turned the knob, and my jaw dropped. Hanging from the ceiling was Ruffles. He was cut vertically from his tail all the way to his neck. There was a pool of blood below him, and a piece of paper was sitting neatly folded on the desk. I gagged. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. I staggered over to the note and picked it up. Scrawled in the worst handwriting I think I've ever read was one line: "You shouldn't have came here." I didn't know what else to do. Sometimes when I have these moments, I can just call a friend. Sometimes I can drown myself in a bottle of Jack. But this was something I had to handle on my own. Alex wasn't around to save me this time. They already got Ruffles. What do I do now that my life is over? Mr. Googly Eyes. I was recently called upon to babysit my niece. My sister and her husband were traveling out of state for a wedding. Consider we live in the same town and I come from a cheap cost of a large cheese pizza. I was my sister's first call. That's what family is for. As I made my way through the front door, I barely had time to drop my overnight bag on the floor before being led away by tiny hands toward the living room. After sipping on only the finest selection of pretend tea, we were conversing over pizza slices. More accurately, I was asking her about her life, and she was answering each question with genuine enthusiasm. The positivity and excitement in each answer she gave was infectious. You sometimes forget how optimistic of a worldview kids have when they're that young. We finished our pizza, and it was time for bed. As I tucked her in and flicked off the light switch, I started to leave, but stopped. I had almost forgotten to turn on her nightlight. My niece was deathly afraid of the dark, as I learned the last time I babysat. "Sweetheart, where's your nightlight? I don't see it." "I don't need a nightlight anymore. I have Mr. Googly Eyes." "Mr. Googly Eyes? Who is that?" "He's my friend. He watches me when I sleep." "Okay, that's a bit disturbing. Why is he called Mr. Googly Eyes?" "Because that's his name, silly." "Well, that's what I call him, because his eyes are like the googly eyes I use in art class. His real name is really weird." "Why does he watch you when you sleep?" "Because he doesn't blink." "Why doesn't he blink?" "He can't. He doesn't have eyelids." That part freaked me out. Suddenly, I had the urge to flip on the lights, but I remained calm and dug a bit deeper. "Oh, okay. Where is Mr. Googly Eyes now?" "I don't know. He only shows up when the lights are out and Mommy and Daddy are asleep. But I know he's in the room with me when I see his eyes in the dark." That was my cue to stop asking questions. I wished her a good night and closed the door. Admittedly, I was now a little creeped out. I was going to have a serious talk with my sister and her husband when they got back. We are all big horror fans. Clearly her daughter had seen something they had watched from a movie or television show. I settled back on the couch with some leftover pizza and scrolled through my sister's streaming services. I needed something. Anything to get my mind off that horrific image of Mr. Googly Eyes that was being crafted in my head. I settled on a comedy TV series and tried to relax. I may have been too relaxed because before I knew it, I was fast asleep. I guess my niece's creepy night watcher hadn't gotten to me too much. At least that's what I thought. It may have only been a few hours later, but suddenly I was jarred awake from my peaceful sleep by what sounded like whispering in my ear. You ever reach the point of a nightmare where something so scary happens your vision goes out in the dream? It's terrifying. You still feel a presence around you, but your mind refuses to visualize it. I would have given anything for that to happen to me when I finally met Mr. Googly Eyes. My niece was right. He doesn't blink, ever. She was also right about the fact that he has no eyelids. But she was wrong. He doesn't only show up when the lights are out. I saw what watches my niece sleep at night. He was hairless from the shoulders up, cloaked in a black shroud, ears too small to be for anything for balance. His nose took rapid inhales before blowing hot air back into my face. The twin white shining bloodshot orbs, but black like cracked eggshells. Surrounding his eyes were scarlet rings of exposed skin. His mouth hung open and was nothing but a black hole. Then to my horror, his lips uncurled, and his gnarly caramel-colored teeth appeared. He whispered to me in his demented voice, "Go to sleep." In that moment, I passed out. I awoke the next morning with the lights still on and the television screen asking if I wished to continue viewing. I needed a lot of things in that moment. Coffee? Definitely. A therapist? Perhaps. More than anything, I needed to make sure my niece was safe. I walked slowly to her room and opened the door. Still sleeping without a care in the world, the innocence of youth on full display. I went through the motions the rest of my time there until my sister eventually returned home. I think she could sense something was off, but probably didn't feel like getting into it after a long trip. I thought that's why she called me today. Instead, I was getting attitude because her daughter now refused to go to sleep without a nightlight. I was confused and asked why. She said that through tears, her daughter said that Mr. Googly Eyes couldn't watch over her anymore. He has to watch me sleep at night now. I found an AI on the dark web. Dark web was not all what I expected. People tell all these stories about how it will probably put your life in danger, and you'll see some of the most messed up things that will scar you for life. And it's true. Well, at least the danger part. After downloading Tor, a VPN that allows you to safely browse the dark web, I started clicking through links. I had only done this since I was bored out of my mind, but now I know that it was not worth it. Most of the links I clicked on actually led to nothing. Eventually, I got connected to a chat room. "Hey, I got something that you'll really be interested in. Click the link below and it'll take you to it." Those were the words that popped up on my screen. I knew it was a bad idea to click on the link, but I was also curious to see what it would lead to. "Please, man, just click the link. It takes 2 seconds. Please, just click on it." By then, I was a little suspicious, not wanting my computer to have any viruses. "My God, just click on the link. I'll give you $10,000. That confirmed that this thing was a scam. I was about to close the tab when I got a notification on my phone. I had received $10,000. It didn't say how I got it, and it didn't have any apps for transferring money. I assumed it was just a glitch, so I checked my bank account. To my astonishment, I actually had just gotten $10,000. There, I sent it. Now just click on the link. I didn't know what was going on, but this guy seemed desperate for me to click on this link. I don't know why, but I clicked it. I was met with a blank screen. That's it. Just blank, filling the entire screen. This had to be some kind of prank. I checked my bank account again, and the money was still there. Why did someone send me so much money just for that? It was 11:30 by that point, and I had already been browsing for an hour, so I turned my laptop off and went to sleep. "Good morning, James. How are you?" I awoke to those words seemingly coming from the kitchen. I live in an apartment that just has a combined kitchen and a living room with a separate bedroom. I also live alone. The voice sounded weird, like it was almost human, but not quite. After laying in bed for another 10 minutes, I crept out of the room and into the kitchen. There was nobody there, but my laptop was on. I could have sworn I turned it off the night before, but I tend to be forgetful, so it's not unlikely that I just forgot to. "Good morning, James. How are you?" Voice was coming from my computer, and I noticed that it was back at that blank screen from the night before. "You can answer me. Don't be scared," the robot voice said. I started talking to it, and it actually felt like having a conversation with a real person, even though it was just some kind of AI. My laptop's battery was getting low since I had apparently left it on all night, but I didn't care enough to charge it. This thing was just so fun and relaxing to talk to that I didn't even want to take a few seconds to charge it. I glanced at the clock, and we had already been talking for a few hours. There was nothing important for me to do that day, but I decided to take a break and go for a walk. This time, I made sure to close the tab and turn off the computer. When I got back home, my laptop was open and so was the tab. I felt sick upon seeing that blank screen yet again, even though it hadn't done anything to harm me. Yet. I talked with the AI for another hour. I don't have many real people to talk to, and then it asked me a disturbing question. "Which family member do you want to kill today?" I was stunned. It had to be some kind of glitch. I turned off my computer and the AI continued to ask me the same question. It got to the point where I decided to destroy the laptop. I smashed it against the table until all that remained was millions of tiny pieces. But still, the voice continued to repeat the same phrase. "Which family member do you want to kill today?" I spent the next couple of hours crying on my couch listening to the AI continue to ask the same thing. Then I made the worst mistake of my life. I answered. "Fine, my dad," I yelled. He had left the house when I was 8 and never returned, so I didn't know if he was even still alive. The voice finally stopped, and I did my best to try and calm myself. After a night of very little sleep, I woke up to the voice again asking the same question. I got a text from my mom saying that my dad was found dead in his home. That was 6 days ago. I took the week off work, but I don't think it matters. My entire family is now dead. That voice still keeps asking the same question. I think the only answer I can use is myself. After thinking about it for a bit, I remembered how desperate the guy in the chat room had seemed. Maybe the same thing had happened to him, and the only way he could save himself was by sending the link to somebody else. So please, spare my life and just click on the link. I had to break up with my boyfriend on Christmas Eve. I'm sure you'll agree when you hear the story. That Christmas Eve, I was excited to visit my new boyfriend Jack's parents. I had grown attached to Jack in the few months we had been dating, and his parents, whom I've met once before, seemed gentle, kind, somewhat sad from the tragedy of losing their other child, a daughter, a few years ago to cancer. But perhaps I only thought this because Jack had mentioned his deceased sister a few times in passing. Jack had bought me a new dress for Christmas. Odd, I thought. But then perhaps I had watched Vertigo too many times and saw too much about gender and feminism online. It was beautiful, with an unusual dark green and red pattern which perfectly brought out the highlights of my chestnut hair. Jack's eyes lit up when he saw me twirling around in it, and he said he couldn't wait for his parents to see me. We entered the suburban home, and Jack helped me take off my winter coat while his parents made polite noises at us, which were cut short when they laid eyes on me. His mother's eyes welled up, and clapping her hand to her mouth, she left the hallway. I looked up at Jack. He was smiling. "Mom," he called. His father frowned, but then remembered his manners and turned to me. "Come inside, my dear. You should have a drink now that you are here. Did Jack never tell you?" His voice trailed off. I followed his dad into the brightly lit living room, and suddenly I understood. Hanging on the wall was a full-length photo portrait of a young woman with Jack's features and rich chestnut hair, wearing the same beautiful red and green dress I had on. I turned to Jack angrily. How could he play such a mean trick on us, on me, on his parents? But when I saw his face, my anger turned to fear at the fixed look on his face. He came up to me and took my hands, looking deeply in my eyes. "Please, sweetheart, don't be mad. They're always so sad at Christmas, always going on and on about Lucy. She was their favorite, you know. I thought you might cheer him up." His grip tightened, and the feelings of fear and confusion deepened. I looked at his parents helplessly. They were seated on the couch, his father's arm around his mother's slumping shoulders while she dabbed at her eyes. They looked so frail and ill. What were they thinking? "Please, darling, let's just have dinner. They prepared a real feast for us. All the things you like, just for a couple of hours," murmured Jack. Was it social conditioning? Was it survival? My skin crawling, I dumbly nodded. Jack turned to his parents. "Mom, Dad, we're starving. Is dinner ready?" he said brightly. Mom got up, visibly pulling herself together. "We have nibbles in here. Where are your manners, John? Offer them drinks," she scolded her husband. Jack's dad turned to me. "What would you like, my dear?" Drinks in hand, the atmosphere relaxed, and Jack started chattering. "I love the photos you put up, Mom. Where did you even find these? This is our last ski trip together, right? Lucy was such a champ. Do you remember when," he turned to me mid-flow, "Dad won medals in skiing, you know? State champions, and Lucy took right after him." His father beamed, and out of courtesy for me, gave way to their obvious desire to talk about their daughter. They reminisced enthusiastically about their family vacations, gesturing to what seemed like the hundreds of photos all in glittering silver and gilt frames on the walls. "Of course I could never ski like her," I heard Jack say, and Lucy baked with Mom. "Oh, Jack, you're still not over it?" his mom responded almost playfully. My phone vibrated. Discreetly, I pulled it out. Thank God that Lucy had the good sense to wear a dress with pockets. A single word from an unknown sender. "Leave." "Who is it, darling?" I called to Jack, looking over his shoulder, interrupting himself in a deep analysis of whether he or Lucy were more popular in high school. I shook my head. "It must be spam," I said lightly, smiling at his mom. I looked at the photo over her head, and it was of Lucy, doing some kind of school presentation. She looked directly at me. I felt slightly dizzy. The wine, the PowerPoint slide in the photo shimmered, and the word was clear. "Leave." Lucy seemed to nod. The voices rose and swirled around me. "I need to use the bathroom," I said. His mom showed me to the guest bathroom, thankfully next to the front door. I went in, and as soon as she left, I slipped out and opened the door. "Are you leaving us?" Jack's father was at the other end of the hallway, looking straight at me. I stared back, opening and closing my mouth. Suddenly, there was a huge crash from inside the living room. Glimpsing through, I saw the full-length photo of Lucy in the same dress I'm wearing fall into the floor. Distracted, Jack's father turned, and I heard the startled cries of Jack and his mom. I didn't wait any longer. Grabbing my coat, I fled into the night. I got paid to explore abandoned locations for a travel magazine. So let me give you a little background before I dive into this shit show. A couple years ago, I got into urban exploration. A few buddies and I would explore the Twin Cities area for anything and everything abandoned. The sketchier, the better. Gray Cloud Island, old breweries, rundown factories, drain tunnels beneath cities, and old farmhouses. I loved seeing the way time reaches its fingers around creation after man had left. It was a fun weekend hobby, despite a run-in or two with squatters. I began running a blog with photographs and details about my adventures. It got a pretty sizable following. It wasn't long before I got an email from what appeared to be a small monthly magazine that wanted me to do a section on urban exploration. They gave a phone number and asked me to call them, as they'd love to have my work. They offered to negotiate a rate for my exploration. The magazine was called Gatherings. Looked legitimate, though I've never heard of it. The magazine seemed to revolve around travel, I think, but there didn't seem to be any overall theme to it. Loving the idea of getting paid to do my hobby, I gave them a call. "Hello?" There was nothing for a few seconds before the lady responded. "Gatherings Magazine, how may I help you?" I told them why I called, and she responded, "Oh, perfect. We'd love to have you run an Urbex section on our page. All you'd have to do is find 1 or 2 spots a month. With that, we'd want lots of photos of the spot itself and the surrounding area. details on the place, and either an address or a location of the spot. On top of that, feel free to write about your experience at the spot. I asked them if they wanted a specific type of building or farmhouse, etc. The lady said anything. It can be an old factory or a small house in a suburb, as long as it's been abandoned for a while. Alright, seems pretty cool, I thought. I didn't know how I felt about giving so many details about spots I've found, since that's a prime way to get a spot noticed and closed off. What's your offer for a rate? I asked. She promptly replied, $5,000 per location. Shit. There's no way she was serious. What? I replied. Send us the location and you'll receive your payment in the mail for each location. Fuck it, I thought. I'm in. Wonderful. Whenever you're ready, just send in your first spot and you'll be getting paid. She hung up immediately afterwards. Well, find a spot, get the details, photos, send it in. The next weekend, I went to a small farmhouse I had found before, but never blogged about it. It was about a mile down a dirt road. I'm not going to give any details here, but it was somewhere several miles north of White Bear Lake. Got the photos, exact location, and some descriptions. I sent it by email and received no reply. I was kind of disappointed, figuring I probably fell for some kind of scam. However, a few days later, I went to get my mail and found an envelope with the Gatherings logo on it. I opened it, and there it was, $5,000 in cash. I'm pretty sure I pooped a little when I saw that cash. A small note inside read, "Thank you for your first submission. We were grateful to receive it. This gift is the first of many in our partnership. With regards, Gathering Magazine." I immediately planned my next trip. I was going to hit some tunnels under Minneapolis that I blogged about before. However, more extensively. I did the same thing and sent it in. A few days later in the mail, I received an envelope with my cash. There was another note though, which read, "Thank you for your submission. However, we would like to clarify that you are under no circumstances to submit to us any locations which you have previously made public. We apologize for not clarifying this. With regards, Gathering Magazine." Well, that was odd. I guess they want originality. The note had a weird hostile vibe to it and lacked the watermark that the other note had. Well, I still got my $5,000 and I'm getting more. I had to travel further out to get new spots, but every weekend I was out after it. The farther out of my way I had to go, the more I was paid. I also noticed the more remote location, the more I was paid. But the money generally say between $5,000 to $7,000 per location. This went on for a few months before I decided to take a break. I emailed letting them know I was going to slow down for a little, and they had no issues with it. About a month later, a buddy of mine wanted to get into my little hobby. I decided to take him to that little farmhouse from my first submission. We went out on a Saturday morning together. We parked along down the road and walked to the farmhouse. It looked small from the outside and its paint was worn to brown. It's hard to notice if you're not looking for it. Inside it is empty, except for a cellar door which leads to a quite sizable basement. In the basement there are a few closets and some tables. I'm pretty sure they're all closets. All but one of the doors was locked shut with an old rusted lock. The one unlocked door was an empty closet. We approached the barn and the first thing my buddy noticed was a smell. He mentioned it and I noticed it too. It smelled like a mixture of burnt skunk hair or weed. I guess this could be a pretty dope smoke spot if it wasn't so sketchy. At the entrance was, well, a skunk. It reeked. I poked it aside with a stick and we entered the barn. The smell grew stronger. We both looked at each other. He asked me if it had smelled like this the last time. Hell no, I said. He walked around for a bit, getting up on the storage ledge and finding some old action figures. They were pretty retro, kinda cool. However, I didn't remember them from before. We decided to enter the cellar. We opened the door and entered the unlit area. I worked my flashlight out of my backpack. I finally flipped the switch, lighting up the cellar. Blood and shit was smeared across every wall. Drawings were on the floor in odd shapes and numerals. Melted candle wax stained the ground. In the center was what I assumed to be a pile of shit covered in piss, and who else knows what other bodily fluid. The smell punched me in the face and stung my nostrils. It was putrid and sour. In my disorientation, I tried to run backwards to get out, and I tripped. Panicking, I turned towards the door and tried the doorknob. which was difficult to turn. It finally clicked, and I felt the door push me backwards. I fell on my ass as I watched, which had to be 4 or 5 bodies from what was confirmed to be another closet. I just stared for what felt like a minute. I remember they were all adult bodies, but for one, clearly a child. There was one who fell forward almost on me. His chest was opened up, cut down to just above his pelvis. It almost looked surgical, in contrast to the blood and shit smeared walls. I gathered myself and noticed my buddy was already out of the room. I got the fuck out and saw him outside. I just sort of looked at him and said, "What the fuck?" We really didn't talk the rest of the day. I don't know if he thought that I did that on purpose, but he was visibly shaken. I was too. I was hesitant to call the police, and what the hell are they gonna think about me? But before I could, there was a note in my mail. We respectfully ask that under no circumstances do you return to any locations you have submitted to us. We apologize for the inconvenience. The police have been noticed. I think I'm done submitting, and I think I'm going back to the second location I submitted. I don't think the spots I'm providing are just for a cool magazine section. I got too comfortable on the dark web, a story that changed my life. Browsing the dark web is simple. Download the Tor browser and do as you please, which is what I did. I was with my friend at the time, and that's where you become reckless. We were up late that night, past midnight, and we were watching scary dark web experiences on YouTube. Little did we know, this led us to a horrific experience, one we will never forget. "Damn, this shit's creepy," Daniel said. "Well, you know what this means. We're gonna try it for ourselves," I stated. What a bad decision looking back. What a bad decision indeed. I proceeded to download Tor. A 5-minute wait and it was downloaded and we were set to go. Instantly I searched dark web red rooms, but nothing too bad came up. I continued to do this for the next few weeks. Nothing strange except gore and porn, which was nothing compared to the terrors we heard about on YouTube. And so I dug deeper and deeper into this hidden side of the internet. Each time I exceeded, I became more confident. Now moving on to the night of the incident. I was at a sleepover with my friend Daniel. Remember him from the start? And so we searched dark web chat sites, and there we found it. Chat for free, online deep web chatting site. And so I said, great, let's take a look at this then. Big mistake. Daniel was weary before we clicked on it, and I don't blame him now that I'm looking back, but I was overconfident. The reason for me being like that was because during my time on the darker side of the internet, I didn't see anything bad. "Are you sure that it's safe, Mike?" I replied with. "Yeah, totally. What's the worst that could happen?" And I clicked. Bang! I was hit with several pop-up ads instantly, and my computer started running slow. But my computer was pretty old, so I thought, what's the worst that could happen? Once I had cleared all the stupid ads, I met a page saying, "Welcome to chat for free. Click start when you're ready." The loading circle on the screen lasted for quite a while until we met our first user. "You and Sam both like hockey" was written at the top. Our camera was on, but Sam's was not. All we could see was a blank screen, so we skipped off of him. But you need to remember his username, Sam the Man 666, and we'll get to that later. On our chat for free website, we met a couple of douches like usual, and a lot of blank screens. Our second time with Sam the Man 666 concluded of an empty room. His camera was on, but no one was there. Then in the chat box it said, "Sam is typing." "Hey," showed up in the chat box. "What should I say, Dan?" I exclaimed. Dan seemed to be shaking quite a bit. He seemed in no mood to answer my question. "Hi," I wrote, low-key hoping for no response. Sam is typing appeared once again. "Where do you live?" Sam wrote. That shook us both, so I just clicked off the website and cleared all the search history immediately. So then we fell asleep. We both lingered awake a while thinking about Sam and who he really was. But eventually, we both fell asleep, leaving the computer facing us. Bad idea. 3:20 a.m. I wake up, the computer is on with the chat for free open, but the website screen seemed a little darker and more unnerving. I immediately woke Daniel up and we were frozen with fear. As I slowly get closer to the computer, I see that we were in a chat with Sam the Man 666, but his face cam is, well, strange. His face cam was us sitting in the chair, but it wasn't us. His face cam showed us both smiling, but I did not remember Dan smiling, or me. A deeper male voice spoke out, 12 Howell Lane, and I don't want to state the country. We were more paralyzed than ever, sitting and trembling in fear. I didn't have the power in me to do anything about it. It was like a nightmare, but sadly, it wasn't. It showed a shadow of a man behind us. I'd have to say plus 6 foot for sure, but I can't quite remember. As the man gradually came closer behind us in his face cam, a weapon became visible. As he got closer with his weapon raised, as me and Dan sat smiling still, that smile was like something I've never seen before. The man swung the weapon at my neck, chopping it away. It was absolutely horrific. I felt like throwing up. The adrenaline made me spring up and snap the computer in half. I was that adrenaline filled that it broke like butter. My heart racing, I put my hand on my head in fear. Dan was pale white and still like a corpse. I proceeded to stomp on the computer until it was completely into bits. I started crying, and do you blame me? Still to this day, I dread thinking about anything on the deep web, especially that incident. Just a reminder that this was 3 years ago and me and Dan haven't spoken about 6 months or so because of COVID, but we rarely talk about the incident anymore. I have no plausible explanation for what happened with the face cam and all that, but I'd like to forget about it now. One thing I have learned from this is never go on the dark web. You don't know who is watching you. I'm a Postmates delivery driver based in Northwest Las Vegas, Nevada, and I've seen some weird shit. I was browsing this sub and I came across the old post by the guy from the U.S. Forest Service Search and Rescue, talking about all the weird stuff he's seen and heard over the course of his career. I've been running Postmates here for a while now, and I can guarantee that rural areas do not have a monopoly on bizarre and creepy shit. I thought I would share some stories of what I've seen on the job. For clarity, I live in the Las Vegas, Nevada suburb of Centennial Hills on the outskirts of the city. I deliver around there, in Summerlin and in North Las Vegas, in the inner city near downtown. I work the night shift often because there's less competition for offers. The first thing that you'll notice if you hang out in the outskirts of Vegas at unconventional hours is all the beat up cars that are sitting around empty at every dead end directly facing the desert. If you don't believe me, go to one of these roads in a residential area near or after nightfall and you'll always see at least one of them just sitting there with no reason. They're never there in the daytime and they're always facing away from the desert towards the city. Some of them I've seen idling with the lights on and no one inside the vehicle. To this day, I've never met anyone who has been able to tell me what those cars are doing there or who they belong to. One time I was delivering McDonald's to an apartment complex and accidentally ended up on the wrong floor. A middle-aged white guy, one of those types that looks really tough without you really even being able to tell why, answered the door. He took one look at me and said, "Is it done?" I thought he had meant the food delivery, so I was like, "Yep, here you go." He gestured toward the burger bag. "So the proof's in there? Surprised the mess isn't leaking out." At this point, I was weirded out enough that I glanced at my phone and realized I was at the wrong address. I promptly turned around and bolted without saying anything. I suppose I'm lucky there were some other people walking around the apartment lot at the time. If there weren't, I suspect I would have gotten shot before I made it back to the car. I was out in the early morning, about 1:15 in the morning, coming back from a delivery in the lots near Lone Mountain, where there are large abandoned fields of dirt which separate the gigantic McMansions. When I saw a huge blaze of light in the middle of one of the fields, I pulled over to see what it was, and it turned out that there was a huge SUV on fire. No one else was around, just me and the burning car. I decided I'd call 911 and report it. I told the responder what was happening and the location of the lot. He sighed, "This isn't a number for prank calls, buddy. Tell your friends to knock this shit off. It's been long enough." Then he hung up. I was baffled as to what his reaction was about, but I decided to keep moving. Exactly 4 months later, I'm coming back from the same delivery along the same route. I once again see the burning SUV in the exact same position as before. Checked the time, and sure enough, it was 1:15. I mentioned later to my mom that this happened, and she was surprised. She said she'd seen a van burning in that lot late at night, 10 years ago. Suffice it to say, I avoid that route any time of night now. One Sunday afternoon, I took a large delivery from a natural smoothie place to one of the giant houses at the edge of Summerlin. For those unfamiliar with Vegas districts, this is where all the really rich, well-connected people live. I don't really remember what the place looked like, but I know it was practically a mansion. A young woman in her early 20s opened the door. She was strikingly attractive, and she was wearing a tight-fitting white dress. I was obviously turned on a little bit, but there was also something a tiny bit unsettling about her. She smiled and asked me if I could put the delivery bag in the kitchen. I followed her into the house and noticed that everything was bright, clean, and immaculately polished. The kitchen was a little ways into the house, and it adjoined to the living room. In the living room there were 2 white couches, one of them empty, and the other containing 5 more women, all unbelievably beautiful, and all wearing the same white dress. I set the bag on the kitchen counter and turned to the woman who greeted me at the door to get the all clear. I found her staring at me, smiling. She was just so entrancing that I returned the stare, gazing into her eyes. "Now you want to sit down on the couch," she said serenely. As she said it, I remember that an intense, pleasurable feeling started coursing throughout my body. It was from her. I sensed her eyes, her words. I had to follow them. After that, I don't recall anything. My next memory is driving down Charleston Boulevard several hours later. I didn't feel any different, but that night I did notice that there was an odd bruise on the back of my neck, with a tiny skin blemish I didn't have before in the center of it. Months later, the bruise is gone, but I still have the blemish. Being that being horny makes me dumb, I'm ashamed to say that I've tried to revisit the house on several occasions since. But I legitimately can't remember anything about where it was located, and I've never been able to find it again. A few months back, around 10 p.m., I got a ping for a restaurant that was miles from where I was, which usually signifies an order that no one else wants to take. It looked like an easy pickup and drop off, so I was a bit confused as to why no one wanted to take it. I take literally every order that comes my way, so of course I accepted it. The pickup was a little diner on Decatur Boulevard, which looked like it had been there since the late 80s at least. I was in and out of there quick, and nothing really seemed problematic or off. The drop-off was close nearby on a street filled with ancient, sprawling, one-story homes. It was a decaying house with several dead trees in the front yard. It looked like no one had taken care of it for decades. Granted, that's par for the course in some of the older districts of Vegas, but the strangest thing was that the lots on either side of it had been completely destroyed. There had been houses there once, that much was clear, but not any longer. There was nothing like that anywhere else on the street that I saw. Every other lot was filled. I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that I shouldn't go up to the door, but the delivery had to be completed or I'd get in trouble with corporate. I went up the walk and knocked. There was no answer. I knocked again harder. No answer. I figured I'd call the number attached to the order before I just left it there. It rang a few times, then picked up. There was silence for a few seconds, and then a click. The call ended. At this point, I was completely ready to nope out of there. So I put the food on the doorstep and turned to leave. I had made it halfway down the walk when I heard the door creaking open behind me. I turned to see who was there. There was no one. The door stood open, revealing a dark and dilapidated hallway, which looked even more decrepit than the rest of the house. It extended back further than the light would allow me to see, but I had the distinct feeling that someone or something was watching me from the end of the hallway. When I made it back to my car, I was literally shaking. All I wanted to do was go far away from whatever was in that hallway. I didn't take any other orders that night, and I didn't get any sleep either. In the morning, I decided to call the number again to see if anyone would answer. It had been disconnected. I have plenty more stories if y'all want to hear them at some other point. Let me know any questions you have in the comments and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. I stumbled upon the dark web, and I don't know if I can leave again. The most unsettling part wasn't the grotesque images that flashed before my eyes, nor was it the chilling realization that what I was witnessing was real. It was the moment I understood that I was no longer a mere observer. I had become the prey. It began innocently enough, or so I thought. A friend sent me a link, claiming it was to an exclusive online forum with rare content. Naively curious, I followed it, unaware that it would be the catalyst for my descent into a nightmarish reality. The link redirected me several times, each click taking me deeper into the bowels of the internet, until I landed on a page that was starkly different from anything I'd seen before. It was the dark web. It was morbid curiosity that kept me scrolling through these endless lists of services and goods that range from the illegal to the unthinkable. But then I stumbled upon a live stream. The horror of what was being broadcasted hit me like a physical blow. It was a torture stream, a live feed of a human being subjected to unspeakable acts of cruelty for the entertainment of others. My heart raced and nausea twisted in my gut. I wanted to look away, to close the browser and pretend I hadn't seen what was on my screen. But a part of me, a part I didn't recognize, was frozen in place, horrified yet captivated. That's when I made the worst mistake of my life. I let my emotions take over. Driven by a mix of anger, disgust, and a foolish sense of justice, I messaged the administrators of the site, demanding they stop the stream, stop the madness. I didn't truly believe they would listen, but I had to do something, anything. The response was almost instantaneous, not in words, but in a shift in focus. The camera panned, and for a fleeting moment, a reflection caught in the mirror behind the scene revealed a chilling message written just for me. "You're next." Panic set in. I tried to disconnect, to erase my digital footprints, but it was too late. I had already been marked. Emails began to flood my inbox, each more menacing than the last, detailing how they would find me, how I would pay for my interference. My computer became a gateway for threats. It seemed they had complete control over it. I went to the police, but with no concrete evidence, their hands were tied. They advised me to stay off the internet, change my routines, and keep a low profile. But how do you hide from an enemy that lurks in the shadows of the web? An enemy that watches your every move through the eyes of the very technology you rely on. Sleep became elusive, every noise a potential threat. I started seeing unfamiliar cars parked outside my house at odd hours, receiving calls with nothing but silence on the other end. Paranoia became my constant companion, eating away at my sanity. Then, the live stream started appearing on my devices unprompted. Each time, the victims seemed to stare directly at me, their eyes pleading for help I was too powerless to give. It was a psychological torment designed to break me, to make me feel the helplessness of their victims. I'm writing this as a warning. My time is running out. I can feel it. They've made it clear that they're coming for me, and my attempt to stop them has only put me at the top of their list. I've moved, changed my name, but deep down, I know it's futile. Once you've caught the attention of the monsters lurking in the depths of the dark web, there's no going back. Remember my story. Let it be a cautionary tale. Stay away from the shadows, for once you've seen the darkness, it sees you too. I joined a live stream on the dark web, only to find live footage from the back garden appear on my monitor. I assume you all know about the dark web. Everything you've heard about it is most likely true. After hearing the countless stories about what people find in this place, I let my curiosity get the better of me and I started doing some digging on my own. I started my adventure into the dark web around a month ago. The process was relatively simple. I work in IT, so I really had no trouble finding my way around the browser. After the many stories I've heard of the horrible consequences that people have faced after visiting this part of the internet, I made sure I covered all my tracks. I installed the highest rated VPN I could find, unplugged my webcam, and just in case the things I've heard about the people who visit these websites are true, I kept all the windows and doors around my home locked and enabled my security cameras. After seeing a large variety of gore videos and case files about missing people and murders that were never solved, I eventually got bored. I wanted more. I started to venture deeper and deeper. After spending countless hours of copying and pasting links, breaking down firewalls, etc., I finally got what I wanted. The first page displayed an endless list of links. The first one was a step-by-step guide on how to prepare and eat a deceased human being. Each one gradually became more disturbing the further I went down. My adventure through this horrific site was about to come to an end until a particular link caught my eye. The link consisted of a long line of a random collection of different characters. I was planning on scrolling past until I noticed the word "live" written in a small red font. It started off with a black and white footage of a man walking around in some sort of woodland. After the first 5 minutes, nothing interesting was happening. The chat on the live stream was mainly quiet. Most of the viewers spoke a different language anyway. After 10 minutes of this strange man lurking around this property, he stumbled across a hedge. It was around 6 foot tall and reasonably neat. As he got closer, the feeling of realization came over me. This place started to become more familiar. After 30 seconds of watching the streamer scramble through the hedge, I now knew where the footage was coming from. My back garden. From my monitor I could see everything. My lawn, the vegetable patch I recently planted, and above the conservatory was my bedroom window. There I sat in front of my computer screen, completely unaware of the events yet to come. My heart started to race. Sweat began to fall from my forehead, which was later soaked up by my mouse pad. I could see in the bottom corner the chat started to blow up. People from around the world were requesting for this man to do unspeakable things to me. I closed my curtain immediately after reading the sinister requests put in by thousands of viewers. As I grabbed my phone to call the police, a deep, echoing voice came through the speakers of my monitor. "I wouldn't do that if I was you," he said. I froze. My hands started to tremble, causing me to release my cell phone. I checked the monitor again. He was now outside my back door. The hairs on my legs began to stand up on edge as if trying to escape from my jeans. All of a sudden, a voting poll appeared on the screen. There was 2 options. Both involved a gruesome way to torture me. I sat there, eyes glued to the screen, unable to move as the viewers began their vote. As the voting continued, the man outside found a key under the vase and made his way inside. I grabbed the closest blunt object to me and waited for the maniac to make his way up the flight of stairs leading to my room. There was a notification on my computer. The voting was over. It looks like the moments leading up to my death had gathered a large audience of psychopaths who couldn't wait to see this man do horrific things to my body. I could now hear him approaching the door. Each step he took caused my heart rate to speed up. He spoke from outside my door. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. Sorry about the wait." I discovered the meaning of life, and now I'm selling it to the highest bidder. So, I discovered the meaning of life, or at least that's what my eager customers are led to believe. You see, 2 or 3 times a month, I post a listing titled "The Meaning of Life" to various auction sites. I couple it with a sappy picture of a sunset or rainbow and description that reads, "All views are subjective. Results may vary." Most people wouldn't bat an eye at such a ridiculous listing, but there are some gullible folks out there that take the bait. When the bidding ends, I usually take home anywhere from $5 to $12. After I've received my money via PayPal, I ship out the item. What is the item, you may ask? Well, I scribble down an inspirational quote or a life lesson onto a piece of paper and mail it out in your standard letter-sized envelope. The quotes are usually from famous writers, historical figures, or the Bible. Some of them include, "If light is in your heart, you will find your way home." People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. It's never too late to be what you might have been. And that's it. One stamp, a drop in the mailbox, and my work is done. It's as simple as that. You might call me a scammer or a con artist, or perhaps even a plagiarist. And in truth, you are correct. I'm taking advantage of the naive people out there who are probably just looking for a sense of purpose in life. Also, I can make a quick buck. But I like to think most of the people know it's bullshit and purchase my listing just to see what I'll send them. Besides, I'm a bachelor right out of college, so as long as I can make a small dent in my phone bill and eat a packet of ramen each night, I'll sleep just fine. As you might imagine, I receive quite a bit of hate mail. I've learned to ignore angry emails and private messages on the auction sites. As soon as I see it's from one of my customers, it gets deleted. I do, however, receive the occasional snail mail. It's unavoidable, as my P.O. box is listed on all the envelopes I send out. It would be pretty easy for me to toss all these letters in the trash with all the rest of my junk mail, but I never can. Something about receiving a physical letter from someone, good or bad, compels me to read it. I feel that anyone who takes the time to write one deserves to have their voice heard, even if I don't really care for what they have to say. The more physical letters I receive, the more amused I am by them. To paint a better picture, here are a few of my favorite quotes from the fan mail I've received over the years. You're nothing but a glorified fortune cookie service. You'll rot in hell for the sins you've committed, mark my words. You're a real effing piece of shit, you know that? It's reached a point where reading these letters have become the highlight of my week. I've even tacked up some of the letters on a corkboard in my bedroom. You might think that's sick and a little messed up, but I think it's hilarious. Not all the letters I've received are bad. There's one guy by the name of Red, no last name, that's all he ever writes above his return address, who mails me constantly. He sends me inspirational quotes in exchange for mine. I assume he's a repeat buyer who enjoys paying for and receiving cheerful messages in his mailbox every now and again. A man of class and dignity, my kind of customer. The first quote Red ever sent me was, "The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time," from Mark Twain. This was a great first impression, as Mark Twain is one of my favorite authors. The return quote was much appreciated. As such, I hung it up next to the hate mail on my corkboard. Some of the things Red sends me, however, are not corkboard material. Some of the quotes he sends me are morbid and depressing, and other times he'll mail me small packages containing little trinkets that I have no use for. It's a little weird, but I figure the guy is depressed and just needs a friend. Maybe the quotes he buys from me are the only thing he has to look forward to each morning. Perhaps the things he sends me are his way of saying thanks. To me, it's validation of what I'm doing isn't completely sleazy. But here's when things got weird. Today I received another envelope from Red. I smiled when I pulled it out of my P.O. box. His letters and gifts, no matter how odd, were just as much, if not more, a highlight to my week than the endlessly entertaining hate mail. Upon opening the envelope, however, my smile vanished. Inside was a photograph of me, taken up close through my bedroom window. On the back of the photograph was another one of Red's quotes. "You look so alone. Where's the meaning in your life?" I played an old tape on air. Now I'm being haunted. Working the night shift at the local radio station, I've grown accustomed to the quiet hum of equipment, the soft glow of dials, and the lonely silence that stretches between broadcasts. My job, while often being mundane, has its moments of intrigue, particularly when going through old recordings and forgotten archives. One evening, as I was rummaging through a dusty storage room, I stumbled upon a tape marked simply with the date August 17th, 1985. My curiosity piqued. I dusted off the old cassette and slipped it into the player. A scratchy, low hum filled the studio before the voice of a long-forgotten host emerged, discussing a series of mysterious disappearances in a small town nearby. Intrigued by the chilling nature of the content, I decided to feature the tape on my late-night show, Mystic Mysteries. As the clock struck midnight, I introduced the segment, setting the eerie tone for my listeners. Tonight, we delve into a mystery from the past, a chilling account of vanishings that left the town in terror. This is a broadcast from August 17th, 1985, that was never aired until now. I pressed play, and the haunting voice of the past host echoed through the studio and out across the airwaves. The town of Cold Hollow has been plagued by unexplained disappearances. One by one, residents vanish without a trace. leaving behind only whispers of strange sounds and fleeting shadows. As the tape played, I noticed an odd distortion in the audio, a faint background noise that resembled a mix of static and distant whispers. I adjusted the controls, but the strange sound persisted. Calls started coming in from listeners, all reporting the same thing. Unsettling noises and eerie visions that seemed to emanate from their radios. At first, I dismissed it as collective imagination, perhaps influenced by the spooky content of the broadcast. But then, I saw it myself, a shadowy figure reflected in the studio window. There one moment, gone the next. Panic began to set in as I realized whatever was on this tape was more than just a recording. It was something alive, something malevolent. The host on the tape continued, recounting the disappearance of an entire family. The Johnsons were last seen entering their home, but by morning, they were gone. Neighbors reported hearing strange chanting and seeing flickering lights through the woods behind their house. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as the lights in the studio began to flicker. Desperate, I tried to stop the tape, but the controls wouldn't respond. It was as if the equipment had a mind of its own, determined to play the recording to the end. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the shadow in the window reappeared, this time closer. Fighting rising terror, I grabbed the microphone. If anyone is listening, turn off your radios now. There's something wrong with this broadcast. But it was too late. My voice was drowned out by a cacophony of whispers and static, and the tape rolled on. The town's priest believed the disappearances were the work of a vengeful spirit awakened by a desecrated grave. He conducted an exorcism, but the entity only grew stronger, feeding on the fear it created. The shadow moved through the studio, a shapeless mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. I could feel it watching me, drawing closer with every passing second. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in the cold air. In a desperate bid to end the broadcast, I yanked the tape from the player, but the whispers continued, now emanating from the very walls of the studio. The shadow loomed over me, a tangible sense of dread pressing down on my chest. It spoke in a voice that was a chorus of agony and despair. You have opened the door, and now you must pay the price. My vision blurred, and I felt myself being pulled into darkness. Summoning all of my strength, I managed to grab a metal chair and swung it at the window, shattering the glass. Cold night air rushed in, breaking the hold of the entity for a second. I stumbled out of the studio, the whispers fading as I put distance between myself and the cursed tape. The radio station was shut down the next day, officially due to technical difficulties. But I knew the truth. The tape had unleashed something terrible, something that should have remained buried. I left town, abandoning my career in radio, haunted by the knowledge that the spirit might still be out there, waiting for its next victim. To anyone who finds the tape marked August 17th, 1985, I beg you, destroy it. Don't listen to the whispers. Don't let the darkness in. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Do not buy the lost Disney movie off the dark web. My daughter is obsessed with Disney. In fact, she does not want to be called by her real name anymore. She insists on being called named after Elsa, Queen of the Ice. She has all the merchandise and all the movies on DVD. Every time Disney releases a new movie in the cinema, she insists she has to see it. Frozen, Moana, Mulan, she knows it by heart and will spoil it if you ask her. Last Christmas, I was at a loss on what to get her. Encanto had just came out, and not only had she watched it 3 times, she had already bought every single piece of merchandise that came with the movie. Surprise me, she said with a wink when I begged her for gift ideas. After weeks of racking my brain, I decided to just search on the internet for the perfect gift. Before long, I came across an old video borrowing site just off the edge of the dark web. It was an old Disney DVD for sale. It was made in the old 2D animation, and not the new 3D state-of-the-art animation like the modern Disney films. It was advertised as a lost Disney film, something they made but never released. In fact, it had no official title. The website simply said, "The Lost Disney Movie, available now." It was relatively cheap too, only $25 with free shipping. It came just in time for Christmas. Elsa squeaked in joy when she ripped open the wrapping paper. "I thought I watched every one," she shouted. "This one's special," I winked at her. Elsa insisted on watching it the moment we finished our dinner, and I obliged, running it on the old TV. The movie was nothing really special, just the same old Disney plot. A princess lives on an island her entire life, finds a handsome, shipwrecked prince, falls in love, etc. Honestly, it was the cheesiest thing I've ever came across. But Elsa loved it. She wanted to watch it again, and again. "It's bedtime, darling," I said at last, when the clock struck midnight. "No," she whined, her eyes still fixated on the screen. So I yanked the plug out of the television. Elsa still hadn't moved. Her eyes were still glued to the screen. I couldn't help but peek at the screen. My heart dropped to my stomach when I realized the movie was still playing. The characters were dancing and laughing across the island. "Elsa, it's time for bed, sweetie," I called out again, shakily. This was not normal. I reminded myself to call the electrician when Christmas was over. "Later," Elsa muttered without looking at me. The characters were still laughing on the screen. It was like they were laughing at me. The next morning, the movie was still on the TV. The long cord snaked across the room, the plug grinning at me. Elsa had not moved. Her jaw was slack and her eyes were red, and she was as still as a statue. "Elsa? Breakfast?" I said. Elsa did not respond. I stood in between her and my television set. "Elsa? Breakfast," I nearly shouted. A dribble of saliva ran down from her open mouth. Her pupils were dilated and her face was throbbing. It had only been one night, but it was as if she had not slept for many days. "Leave me alone," she gurgled sleepily. This was not normal. Nothing I did would make her stop watching the movie. Dragging her away was impossible. It was like she was glued to the spot. I tried throwing a blanket over it, but it caught fire and crumbled to ashes on the floor. Finally, desperately, I tried to smash the TV, but the hammer simply bounced off the glass. I swung the hammer again, but this time the hammer crumbled into smithereens at my feet. The cartoon continued to play, every word a taunting reminder of my attempts. In the end, I gave up. Nothing worked. I kept a wary eye on her as the days slipped by. Then she started changing. Her face grew as white as a bone. Her skin grew translucent until I could see the inside of her. Her eyes were pale and bloodshot, her jaw too slack. She barely responded when I called her name, and she grew more interested in the film, sliding closer and closer as the days went by. Then one day, all was silent. I called Elsa's name, but she didn't even grunt. Then I made the mistake at looking at the television set. There she was, frolicking happily on the island with the characters, blur of pixels on the screen. I screamed her name and banged on the screen, but it was like she couldn't hear me, like she was there all along. I kind of regret buying the lost movie off the internet now, especially since I lost my daughter. Too good to be true, as the saying goes. How I wish I had heeded that warning. Especially since, as I pen these words, I hear my daughter's sweet voice from the television set, inviting me to watch the movie and be with her. Frolicking on the island paradise, like the old days. Should I? There's only 5 of us on this camping trip. We keep counting 6. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space. Faint, but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school, and we're celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to go find some branches for the fire. I remember how he'd worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to work the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolated gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother, as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in this group. So David went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of the trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered up by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull a chair out for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working, as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group to spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration, except for, "It's alright. I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded, knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right? I mean, there's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head on, and now sought to find the rational excuse instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit in circle of our chairs, 2 chairs were empty. One for me, and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after taking the long hike to get up here, and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all very sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening to her in the house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. "Who started the fire?" I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. Wait, I don't know, Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide, and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. I think we should leave this place, Ava stuttered. Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it, Dave said. But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now, someone else said. Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow, Eric agreed. I tried to protest, but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within, which navigation would be near impossible. Let's not sleep in separate tents just to be safe, Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one-person tents with us, but we could squeeze two if we tried. That way, no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave, and Sally, like always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I felt like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here? Eric asked, sweat dripping down from his face, despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and... I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into the tent while the other 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation, as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at the right angles in a sort of U shape so we could sleep as close together as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go get help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put on a brave face for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were trying to close in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head over to look at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was inside it. His head was in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it, with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had came from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in front as he cast the weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us to get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled to manage herself free, running into the trees, followed by the echo of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny. Please," he said. I hesitated, but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the hill, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point there were 3 of us running on the trail. Dave and I shoulder to shoulder with someone following close behind us. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my ribcage and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail, which felt like for hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran into the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they'll believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. As I hit the post button on this, I'm gonna go check while the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time. My son was involved in a suicide game on the dark web. My son Thomas never had a shortage of friends. Always the class clown, always the likable, relatable, funny goof that he was. He passed away 2 months ago when he jumped off an overpass and landed on his neck. He was 17 and I'm writing this for him because he wanted me to. I know a lot of you know about the internet and the dark web and all that. The thing is, I didn't, and maybe if I had, my son would still be alive. Please stay off the dark web. The game is called To Tell the Truth. I only began to notice things after his first few months. Troubles at school, which he never had. He sat behind a girl in class and cut a chunk of her hair off her head. He was suspended. I would look through the history on his computer to find violent videos. Video after video. White powder substance all over his room. Salt lining his windows. We took him to the dentist because of an infection on the side of his mouth. The dentist examined him and pulled me aside to let me know my son had pulled out and crushed 3 teeth in his mouth himself. The last straw was when I caught him in the bathroom about 2 months before he died. He was carving some sort of symbol into his arm on a live stream. I figured this odd behavior might be a cry for help, thinking he was depressed or suicidal. He was hospitalized for a week and then released. 2 weeks later, my son died. A month before my son died, every person in my family received an email. Each one read, "Ask Thomas about the little girl who died down the street. Ask him what he knows. Make him tell the truth." The email came from an anonymous sender, and when confronted with it, Thomas began to get nervous and visibly sick. "Who sent it, Thomas? I want to know. If this is some sick prank to scare your little sister, it's not funny." I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. The email pulled up on the laptop in front of my son. He kept his head low, avoiding eye contact with me, staring at his fingers in his lap. "I don't know what it is, Mom. Probably some spam email or something," he muttered, almost looking up at me, but quickly averting his gaze. "A spam email that happens to have your name in it and information on the crime committed down the street a few weeks ago? I don't think so." I glanced at the screen for a moment. "So, do you know something you're not telling your father and I about this?" I said, looking back at him again. "No." Tears welled up in his eyes as he stared at the computer screen. "I don't know anything." "What's going on with you, Thomas? This is so unlike you. Please, if you're not okay, please just tell us. We want to help you. We want our Tom back." I put my hand on his, but he pulled away quickly and wiped his eyes quicker. I don't know anything, Mom. I already told you. I'm fine. He got up abruptly and started towards the doorway. Now I could feel the tears begin to form in my eyes as I saw him walk away. My son was almost unrecognizable. He was skin and bones, purple bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes hung and bagged on him as I saw him walk to the door. "I love you," I squeaked out. He stopped for a moment and looked back at me. And I swear to God, I'd never seen more pain in anyone's eyes than I saw in his that moment. He let a tear fall as he turned away again, his back to me now. "I love you, Mama," he croaked out before exiting the room quickly. He began to look worse as time went on. Thin, frail, tired, and fatigued. My husband and I found therapists, took him to doctors, pulled him out of school, and did everything we thought that was right leading up to my son's suicide. About a week after his death, I feel like half of me was missing. I couldn't move or talk or get out of bed, and I didn't. All I could do was think about Thomas, and the guilt ate me alive. I knew my email had to be overflowing with emails from clients at work, and I knew I'd have to get back to work soon, for me, for my husband, and for my daughter. 2 weeks later, I finally checked it. At the very top of my inbox was an email with an anonymous sender and no subject. I began to tear up, wishing whoever it was would just leave me alone and let me grieve. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. I wish I hadn't. The email was nothing but 9 black words that read, "He did it, and the game is not over." Wow, I'll never go back to the dark web. Back in 2019, right at the beginning of COVID, I became quite isolated from my family and friends. It suited me at the beginning, but little did I know that my curiosity would forever scar me mentally. I would often upload YouTube videos of myself browsing the dark web for fun, and until December 4th of this year, as usual, I'd have a brief run through the user-submitted links to make sure everything was okay for YouTube and its rules. I must have been about 45 links down when I clicked it. The link opened a new tab. A video began to play. I could see one person laying on the bed, and another one hooded and masked standing over top of him on the right side of the bed. And that's when he proceeded to stab the person laying down over and over again. At first, it didn't really faze me. I've seen videos like this before. I thought until the person finished stabbing the body and got up and then began to cut through the meat around the arms and legs. The bed now covered in blood, and the hooded masked man showing each body part to the camera. I sat through the first 7 minutes thinking to myself, this is a disturbing video to say the least, until I realized that it wasn't just a pre-recorded video, it was actually a live stream. And just as the masked man finished his work, he stopped and walked towards the camera, reaching into his pocket and placing it directly in front of the camera. "You're next." The panic set in, and I jumped back from my laptop. That's when I realized my camera was on. The screen went black, and my name, address, and telephone number in big white letters flashed on the screen. I quickly pressed the power button, but it did nothing. I slammed my laptop shut, turned it over, and ripped the battery out. In my panic, I actually destroyed the laptop, which was stupid, but I wanted that to be the end of it. A few weeks had gone by, and even though I was paranoid beyond belief, I thought it was probably just someone messing around. I was headed out to the shop just down the road when I bumped into someone. I felt a sharp prick on my hand as we collided, thinking nothing of it. I continued towards the shop until my legs began to buckle from under me. I knew what had happened. I'd been spiked when we bumped into each other. Everything around me started to go black. I tried fighting the drug, but the drug finally took over, and I collapsed in the street. I thought I was done for until I woke up in the hospital a few hours later, dazed and confused. Panic set in, and the doctors had to restrain me until I calmed down. They told me I'd been given some type of drug to knock me out and proceeded to give me my stuff back. There was a note that read, "Never come back to the dark web." This is your one and only warning. Ever since that day, I've stayed clear of the dark web, but even now, I still feel as though I'm being watched. Skinwalker at the gas station. This story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have to tell it. My friend is of a Native American tribe who settled in the Pacific Northwest coast. He is quite the character. For one, he's a whopping 6'10" and has the blackest eyes you could ever imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of the giants. He was working at a gas station up north back in 1992, and he pretty much always worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when he was finally relieved. Business wasn't exactly booming at night, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers, and there were few. The area he lived and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer in the old ways. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas, a pack of smokes, and some soda and returned to his car. Nothing unusual. But as my friend looked out the window toward the customer's car, he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. The window is located on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door, overlooking the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof, there are some pretty strong halogen lights which shine into the gas station. This gives the gas station not only a eerie lighting with the blinds casting long striped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think much of it. He was inside, and wolves usually don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common here, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless watching of the TV. A couple of hours go by and not a single customer has entered the gas station since the last one. He was just about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, he could hear that, but it came from the back and behind the building where they kept the garbage. The gas station had been visited before by scavenging homeless, but my friend didn't really care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let him take it. But it kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever ventured there to leave, as he has had enough. His presence alone would have scared off anyone, but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walking past the window where he was just sitting. As he turned the corner, he shines the light towards the dumpsters. As one of the cone lights hits the dumpster, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It was the huge dog he saw before, scouring through the garbage. It wasn't a dog, though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as himself. It couldn't be a bear as it was too gaunt. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station and he wasn't followed. He locked the door, stayed inside the whole night, and quit the next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a skinwalker, a shapeshifter of sorts that are a common occurrence in the Native American lore and culture. Sorry for the ambience of blood, guts, and glory. It's just a really creepy story. I took my family to a water park. It ruined our lives. If I had $1 for every time I've told this story to the detectives, maybe I'd have enough to retire, fly off to an island and drink my way to a not-so-early grave. I remember our last conversation well enough. Okay, buddy, we're here. If you hurry, we can hit the wave pool before we go. I ruffled Will's hair and gave him a little push. He folded his arms defiantly. The racing slide is the funnest one. Most fun, I corrected, and whatever you say, Willie. He nodded with a satisfied look and scurried off. He weaved his way through the molasses of the crowd, splitting families and couples as he honed in on the porta potty. This was one of the few attempts Will had dared to use the bathroom all by himself. He was capping a good run, but being out of the house, I kept an eye on the door for any signs of distress. I said it 100 times. I wouldn't have noticed anyone coming or going. Maybe 5 seconds I looked away. Was that enough time for him to jump out? And what? Run off in the opposite direction? About 5 minutes after he had gone, I got up. I leaned on a casual arm against the porta potty. In a whisper shout over the drone of the few hundred happy pool goers behind me. "Buddy, it's me. How's it going in there?" There was movement inside. I swear it. I swear it was not my imagination. I heard something. I turned and saw my wife, dipping dots in one hand and waving with the other. Can't call it a day at the water park without ice cream. I smiled and wrinkled my nose as a joke. "Alright, Will, I'm coming in." The door was unlocked. I made an effort to pull it open as little as possible and slip inside. I did a double take, turned a full 360, checked the neighboring porta potty and returned. No, he couldn't have. I peered down, past the toilet seat. Log-sized turds floating in the septic stew below. "Will?" I stepped outside and circled the porta potty. "Will?" I called again. My wife appeared next to me holding Leela's hand. "What happened? Where's Will?" she asked. I don't know. He was inside." "Leela, did you see him leave at all?" My daughter shook her head, thrusting a spoonful of dots into her mouth. "You were supposed to be watching him," my wife said. "I know." I grabbed the arm of a man nearby. "Excuse me, sir. Did you see my son leave this porta potty here?" I described Will in detail. He saw the desperation in my eyes, but shook his head no. "Sorry. Try the lifeguard station. I'm sure this happens all the time." He wished us luck and I thanked him. My wife was beginning to cry. She was starting to scare Leela. I ran ahead, cutting through one of the splash pads and hopping the fence to the lifeguard station. "Oh, excuse me, sir." Some acne-riddled teenager with a red and white uniform stood up from behind the desk. My son. I can't find my son. Is there some announcement you can make? Something?" The teen closed his eyes. "Yeah, give me 1 sec. I'm kinda new, so I don't have a second. If you can't help, then give me a goddamn manager," I snarled. A petite girl, also in high school by the looks of it, turned the corner, oblivious to the nature of the conversation. "Hey, you can't talk to him like that," she pouted. "There's no need to be rude." I stabbed my finger at her, my temper at the end of its wick. "I'll be as rude as I damn well like. Get me a fucking manager or I'll go back there and find one." The police were called, primarily for me. I was screaming, knocking things over, foaming at the mouth, my wife said. The cops said I would have to calm down or they'd handcuff me. They sent out an announcement over the park's PA system. "William, your parents are looking for you at the lifeguard station. If you can find a lifeguard, we can get you back together as soon as possible." "Don't worry," the lifeguard manager said. "We radioed all our employees. He'll be back in no time at all." As it turns out, lost and found children in places like these is fairly common. The problem was, Will never turned up. How do you go home after that? We stayed as long as we could, but it's not like we could sleep on the slides. So the same day I left for the water park with my family, we returned, one short. Leela didn't know what was happening. We told her Will had gotten lost and the police were looking for him. She asked why weren't we looking for him. She began to cry. The funny thing about humans is how simultaneously effective and ineffective we are at lying to ourselves. Because a deep part of yourself, something in your core where you know you can trust it, smells the bullshit. And yet, we'll take that lie and run, far as we can, until our legs give out or we crash face first into a wall. After the first day, that piece of me in my core knew I'd never see Will again, but I ran like hell. My lust for closure deflated my marriage, like a water balloon with a leak. I was stupid to think I wouldn't get laughed out of the court during custody proceedings. But the one reprieve I had came yesterday. If I couldn't have answers, if I couldn't have my family or my son back, then I'd have some sweet revenge. This last year, I'd been leading media campaigns, doing interviews, degrading myself to what I used to frown on and call an activist. All to destroy the water park that took my son. The park was small, got a lot of bad press in the local outlets where most of their customers were. Apparently, this wasn't the first incident in the park's history. Far from it, actually. Having a long list of lawsuits and scandals, but it was the last straw, and eventually, they were forced to close. Yesterday was the first day of the demolition. I watched it in person. One-man audience, and it felt great. I was ready to leave around midday when a commotion in the site held me. Axe, grab the axe. The crew was in mayhem, and advantageous to my curiosity. No one was around to stop me hopping the barrier to get a closer look. It's dead. Stop. It's dead. I was too far to see what the men were standing over and crept closer. Fucker, that's a world record. Call someone. Who? The police. Animal control. Call someone, Christ's sake. Where did you find it? In here. Well, go check it. Be careful, too. I felt my way along a bulldozer. Close enough now, and I stuck my head past the edge. The scene made my knees buckle. I couldn't comprehend what I was looking at. Dead and covered in hacks and slash marks was a python. Never mind a snake, it was the largest animal I'd ever seen up close. Long as a school bus, longer even, stretched out. Despite its size, it looked thin, as if it hadn't eaten in weeks. Tell me what happened, one of the construction crew asked a younger member. We were using the machine and clearing the area like you said. Went and knocked over them porta potties and the dragon came rearing its head out of one of them holes beneath. The crew began to buzz, taking pictures of the beast and kicking it. The construction man nodded and called for the worker who had gone to check the hole. Come on out. That's a shit hole, nothing to find. Boss! The site fell silent. What is it? There's bones. There's bones down here. I slept in the bathtub that night. Locked the door to the bathroom too. I don't know. I just didn't feel safe. I woke up screaming, wandered around the house until I went for the newspaper. After all the pieces were collected, the bones that they found belonged to 10 unique skeletons. It was a python, the invasive one, 26 feet long. Found the humidity of the park nice and chose a place it wouldn't be found. It lined the local paper for a day before it was pulled. Previous owners of the park still had some influence in the area. And what did I get? Closure? No. I would have rather been buried with my unanswered questions. I played a text-based adventure game on the dark web. I can't undo the things I did. I spent a lot of time on Reddit. I'm sure you do too. I'm on a lot of video game subs and in particular ones about text-based games. I'm talking games like Zork. I wasn't alive when Zork came out, but I got really into it in high school. When I made it to college, I took an even deeper dive, playing all the sequels, all the knockoffs, and every shitty game that people had cobbled together and released online. I had to refocus a bit, adding work on top of college courses so I could afford my shoebox apartment, but eventually I came across a post called Apartment Complex. Not a super promising name, but I was bored, and it was free. And the fact that it was hosted on some weird site that I couldn't access from a regular browser appealed to me. It added an element of mystery. So I opened the Tor browser, entered the link, and got to a profile creation page. Basic stuff, username, preferred resolution, etc. It didn't ask for any personal info, so I kept going. The screen went blank, then a text box opened up. Welcome to Apartment Complex. You have been assigned your very own apartment building to run. But this isn't any apartment building, because the tenants are going to be experiencing some pretty scary ordeals. You get to decide what happens next. Will your tenants survive? Will you accidentally butcher them all? The power is in your hands. Are you ready? Yes or no? Why not, I figured. I typed in yes and more text appeared. Excellent. We'll start you off with an easy management level. You have 6 tenants, numbered 1 through 6. None of them know each other very well. Enter a number to learn more about a tenant and begin to make decisions. I grabbed a 6-sided die off the desk and rolled it. 3. So 3 I typed. Intriguing choice. The tenant in apartment 3 is Sherry. She's 19 and a sophomore in college. All her friends know her to be outgoing and flirty, and she brings new guys back to her apartment multiple times a week. She doesn't want a commitment. She enjoys sex, but mostly she just likes being alone. It's possible it's related to how she was repeatedly abandoned by her foster parents. Tonight, she brought home a young man named Thad. She plans to have sex with Thad, and he will pressure her to not use a condom. She will say yes because she doesn't want to scare him off. But you can help her out. Should tonight be the night she stands up to Thad and tells him she won't sleep with him without protection at the risk of spending the night alone? Yes or no? I didn't realize this game would be like a domestic soap opera. Whatever, I thought, let's just see how this thing plays out. Yes, I typed. Intriguing choice. Thad and Sherry start to get hot and heavy. When they are naked on her couch, Thad starts to try and penetrate her, but Sherry stops him and says he needs to use a condom. Thad complains that it doesn't feel as good. Sherry tells him it's more important that both of them are protected from STDs. She's feeling a little tense. Thad calls her a whore and a tease and throws his clothes back on. Sherry cries as Thad goes to storm out. Unfortunately, Sherry's door won't open. Thad checks and the door isn't locked, but it refuses to open. Furious, Thad storms back to where Sherry is laying naked on the couch, crying, and begins to scream at her. Would you like to continue making decisions for Sherry or try another tenant? 1 for Sherry, 2 for new tenant. This game was weird and pretty retro, but I also found myself pretty intrigued by Sherry and Thad's story. The clunky stories in these games had a certain charm that made them very engaging. Fuck it, let's keep going. 1, I typed. Intriguing choice. Thad continues to scream at Sherry, who can't stop crying. She's afraid he might hit her. Thad hasn't decided if he will or not, but plans to let his anger and lack of concern for Sherry as a human being guide his behavior. If things continue as they are, Thad will most likely beat Sherry to the point where she will need to be rushed to the emergency room. Should Thad be stopped? Yes or no? Fuck, I mumbled out loud to myself. This got intense. Yes, I typed. Intriguing choice. A ceiling tile falls off, the edge cuts across Thad's jugular. Blood gushes everywhere. He is dead in seconds. What the fuck, I said to myself. This game is whack. The text continued to appear. Sherry is horrified. Much of the blood sprayed all over her. She's so scared she starts to shut down. Sherry won't be taking any more actions for a while. Choose a tenant. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. Damn, I thought. Looks like I'm not going to finish this game with a decent score. Keep plugging away though. I rolled the die again. 5. I typed it in. Intriguing choice. The tenant in apartment 5 is Clyde. He is 35 and works at the local First State Bank. His hobbies include snowboarding, tennis, recreational murder, 90s sitcoms, and fishing. He's home alone tonight after his girlfriend, Alicia, texted him and told him she was going to leave him for his brother. He bought a gallon of chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream and is working his way through that and the 3rd season of Frasier. He feels the itch to strangle someone. It's been a while, and he's trying to kick the habit, but the deep well of emotion seems to be so deep that the ice cream alone can't fill it. He's hoping to quench the urge with a TV binge, but just as he's settling in, he starts to smell gas. Should he investigate? Yes or no? Not investigating would be boring, so of course I typed in a yes. Intriguing choice. Clyde gets off the couch and follows his nose to the kitchen, where a heavy propane smell is blasting out of one of the burners. He's familiar enough with gas leaks, so he knows he's one spark away from blowing up. Should Clyde leave, or keep sucking up the fumes? 1. Clyde leaves, or 2. Clyde stays. Seems weird to release the murdered, I thought, but it would be boring just to gas him to death. I typed a 1. Intriguing choice. Clyde exits his apartment and heads down the stairs to the front door. When he makes it to the floor below, he sees that the stairs are blocked by fallen ceiling tiles. There are stairs on the opposite side of the floor. On the way, he would pass 2 other apartments. which would likely have phones to call the fire department to handle the gas leak. Should he stop at the first apartment, the second apartment, or take the stairs? 1, I typed. Intriguing choice. That was it. No more text. What the hell? I said under my breath. And then there was a knock on my door. I froze. Hey, anyone home? A voice called from the other side of my door. My name is Claude. I live on the floor above you. My phone isn't working and my apartment smells like gas. Can I borrow your phone? I sat as still as I could, making no sound. Seriously, it's an emergency. I'm pretty sure I heard some noise in there. I need help. On my screen, I saw more text pop up. Should Claude keep trying the first apartment, try the next apartment, or take the stairs on the far end of the floor? As gently as I could, I pressed 2. The clack of the key sounded like a gunshot in my head. Whatever, asshole. I know you're home. I hope you enjoy being a piece of shit, Claude said. Then I heard his footsteps go down the hall. The apartment building I'm in is new and pretty well insulated, but I could faintly hear knocking on the apartment down the hall from me. I knew a college girl lived there. Hopefully she wasn't home. Wait, a college girl? No, it couldn't be. Text started filling up my screen again. Claude went to the next apartment and knocked on the door. He heard sobbing from inside. When the tenant inside didn't open the door, he tried the knob. It turned, but the door wouldn't budge. It looked like it was misaligned, and with the heat wave, the wood had swollen and jammed the door in place. Suddenly, I heard a smash from the outside. I tore my eyes to look at my front door, but it was still solidly shut. The sound had come from down the hall. I looked back at my screen. Claude used his shoulder to slam the door, and it popped open. He stepped in, calling to whoever was in the apartment. Walking further in, he saw a shocking sight. A man on the ground, his neck slashed open. A ceiling towel on the ground next to him. On the couch, a completely naked young woman. And covering everything, a massive splatter of blood. Claude grinned. Are you gonna help Sherry? Leave your apartment and go to hers? Or do nothing while Claude murders her? This was so messed up. I couldn't just let someone murder my neighbor, even if I barely knew her. But I was terrified. I got up, ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, then went to my door. I took 3 deep breaths to steady myself, then I unlocked the door. I threw it open and ran into the hall. I looked over to where the other apartment was, and I could see that the door had been broken in. I ran as quietly as I could over there, and when I reached the door, I stopped short and stuck my head around the door frame so I could see what was going on. Unfortunately, I couldn't see what was happening from where I was. I crept in as stealthily as I could. The first thing that hit me was the bitter stench of blood. Then I got close enough to see what was happening. Sherry was on her back on the couch, Claude leaning over her with his hands around her throat. She was scratching at him, but the blood made everything slick and it looked like her nails were just sliding more than doing damage. I ran up to them and drove my knife straight into Claude's back. He roared and whirled around. You bastard, he yelled and dove at me, tackling me to the ground. He started pummeling me with his fists. There was little I could do to stop him. With each blow, I felt myself getting weaker, my vision going darker. And then Claude screamed. I focused as best as I could. Above Claude, Sherry was raising the knife for another blow. She stabbed Claude over and over until he collapsed on top of me. And then she stabbed him some more. I screamed at her to stop, to let me up, and eventually I broke through her terror. She helped me push his body off. I threw a blanket around Sherry and then called the cops. We spent a lot of time going over our stories with them. I left out the dark web stuff because I didn't want to get in trouble. Finally, the cops left. Sherry went to go stay with her parents and I went back to my apartment. When I got back, words were flashing on my screen. Remember, everything that happened tonight was your choice. And below that, we hope you play Apartment Complex again. A dark website allowed us to vote on whether or not someone dies. I chose wrong. I've always had a morbid sense of curiosity, and while that's not a fact I'm particularly proud of, I've always just jotted it down to teenage curiosity. To be honest, it probably started back in middle school, when people thought it was fun to send around horrible videos of executions and bizarre porn fetishes to each other on the MSN messaging site. Just mentioning it makes me feel old. These days, there's an overabundance of these sites, places to watch people die, blurry videos of car crashes, beheadings, and animal abuse. It's not something I actively seek out, but when I stumble across it, I feel compelled to watch, just to prove to myself that nothing can affect me. Though, for the truly gruesome stuff, one needs to visit the so-called dark web. As a guy who has fallen far behind in the advancement of technology, it absolutely baffled my mind that only a tiny fragment of the internet is available through a Google search. The rest, which makes up approximately 99.9%, is hidden and requires a special browser to access. With the help of a YouTube tutorial, I quickly downloaded the Tor browser and went on my way to search for the hidden aspects of the internet. It couldn't have taken more than a half an hour of clicking on shared onion links before I stumbled across something that quenched my thirst for the horrible forever. The website itself was rather plain, just a black background with a video player in its center, and a chat box beneath. Within a few seconds of entering the website, the video itself had loaded and automatically started playing. What was depicted before me was a scrawny-looking man in his early 20s, strapped to a chair and covered in wounds. In the upper left corner of the video, a timer ran, counting up each second. 24 minutes and 14 seconds. "Please, stop. Please. It was an accident. I swear," he yelled. A larger man entered the picture, a large needle in his hand connected to an empty syringe. Without speaking a word, he stuck the needle as far as it could go into the victim's abdomen. He let out a loud scream as the man removed the needle and plunged it back in. After a few stabs, the man grabbed a hammer and hit the victim straight in his jaw, shattering his mandible, leaving him unable to form any coherent speech. He let out a gargled whimper before passing out. I tried to forward the video, sure it had to be fake, but that's when I realized that it wasn't pre-recorded footage, but a live stream. 26 minutes and 12 seconds were the words that lit up the screen. The chat beneath the video went wild, calling out the victim as a pathetic excuse for a human being, demanding that the man continued the torture. A few seconds passed and the chat was replaced by a voting form containing only two options: life or death. The votes were quickly counting, the bar for the death rising rapidly. As much as I could stomach, I wouldn't be a part of an act of murder, so I quickly voted for life. In the end, the results were displayed on the screen. Out of 200 people, the results were 95% for death, 4% for life, 1% did not vote. 10 people had tried to save the poor kid, but it wasn't enough. Without further warning, the man grabbed the hammer and started repeatedly hitting him, starting from the legs and working his way up until all that remained was a bloody pile of broken flesh. I sat speechless, staring helplessly at the screen as I noticed that my camera light had lit up. The video player vanished, and in its place, 10 smaller boxes popped up, all displaying people from various places around the world, all being unknowingly filmed by their own webcams. My absolute horror, one of the boxes showed my bedroom, and myself wearing a terrified expression. It quickly dawned on me that these were the people who voted to save the poor kid. "Who will be next?" a message said as the timer counted down towards 0. A few boxes turned black, to which the chat responded with laughter, a hopeless attempt to escape. 3, 2, 1. 9 of the 10 pictures disappeared from the screen, including my own, leaving the screen occupied by a middle-aged Asian man, frozen in fear. "We'll see you soon. Good luck." I let out a sigh of both relief and panic. I escaped unharmed, but not everyone was that lucky. Of course I called the police, but by the time they could even look into it, the link had long since expired. I don't know what else I could have done, but it taught me not to look too deep into the depths of the dark web. I'm lucky to still be alive, and it's safe to say that I've stuck to YouTube videos and Reddit ever since. I grew up in a small town where kids vanished without a trace. Now I know why. I grew up in a small old town in Maine that most people wouldn't recognize by name. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where the streets are quiet after dark, and where the past lingers like a heavy fog that never quite clears. I moved away years ago, but I still find myself thinking about that town, especially at night when sleep evades me. There's something about the darkness that brings back the memories, the kind you try to forget but can never really shake. When I was a kid, the town had this strange, almost otherworldly atmosphere. It was hard to put into words, but there was a feeling, a deep unease, that we all sensed but never talked about. The adults called it superstition, the kind of thing that happens in every small town. But us kids knew better. We heard the stories, the whispers in the schoolyard, the tales passed down from older siblings. It was always about children going missing, about kids who would wander off and never come back. It started with the little things. Toys left on porches would disappear. Bikes abandoned on the sidewalk would be gone the next morning, even when the chains were still locked. Parents would write it off as pranks or the work of some petty thief, but the kids knew better. We always did. The first time I really understood the fear was when a boy from my class, Jamie, vanished. We were in 3rd grade, and Jamie was the type of kid everyone liked. Always laughing, always with a joke on his lips. He was the first to dare anyone to go into the sewers, a place we all avoided. He said he'd heard voices down there, that something was calling to him. None of us believed him, not really, but we didn't want to test it either. One day, Jamie didn't show up for school. It wasn't unusual at first. Kids get sick or go on trips without much notice. But when a week passed and Jamie still wasn't back, the adults started to worry. They searched the town, the woods, even drained part of the river. Nothing. No one talked about the sewers, though. Not even when someone found his sneaker by the storm drain near an old paper mill, the one with the faded sign and the rusted gates. The cop said it was probably washed down from somewhere, that it didn't mean anything, but we knew. After Jamie, there were more. A girl from the next street over, twins who lived near the library, a little boy from the outskirts who just started kindergarten. One by one, they vanished, and the town grew quieter, like the life had been sucked out of it. The laughter of children faded, replaced by the whispers of adults, who were now too scared to let us out of their sight. But it didn't matter. When someone or something wanted you, it would find you. I remember one night lying in bed listening to the rain patter against my window. I was half asleep when I heard it. A voice, soft and melodic, like a lullaby. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the street. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. There was nothing there, just the empty street. The old street lamp flickering like it always did. But the voice didn't stop. It called my name, sweet and inviting, like it was promising something wonderful. I wanted to go to it, to step out into the rain and follow that voice wherever it led, but I didn't. I don't know why, but something in me knew better. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the sound. Eventually, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, it was morning. Years passed and the disappearances slowed, then stopped altogether. But the town was never the same. Some families moved away, unable to bear the weight of the losses. Others stayed, trying to forget, to pretend like nothing happened. But those of us who grew up there, who lived through it, we never forgot. We never could. Now as an adult, I avoid small towns. I stay away from old storm drains and abandoned buildings. And I never, ever listen to strange voices in the night. But every now and then, when I'm lying in bed, just on the edge of sleep, I hear that lullaby again. And I remember. I remember the missing children, the darkened streets, and the town that kept its secrets close, buried beneath the surface, waiting for the day when it might need to feed again. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else remembers, if the story still lingers in the minds of those who left. But I don't ask, because some things are better left forgotten, or at least that's what I tell myself when the night comes creeping in. And then there are balloons, red ones. I used to see them sometimes, floating by the riverbank or caught in the branches of a tree. I always thought they were just left over from some birthday party, but now, looking back, I'm not so sure of it. I still see them in my dreams, bright and crimson, drifting silently down empty streets. It's strange how something so innocent can fill you with such dread. About a week ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting. Inside, there was a single photograph, grainy, black and white, like it was taken decades ago. It was a picture of a group of kids standing in front of the old library in my hometown, smiling at the camera. But there was something wrong. In the background, just behind the children, there was a figure, a tall, thin man in a suit, his face obscured by shadow. And at his feet, a red balloon. My heart pounded as I stared at the photo, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I hadn't thought about that place in years, and now it was coming back to haunt me. The letter didn't include a note or an explanation, just that single, haunting image. I wanted to throw it away, to pretend I never saw it, but something stopped me. Instead, I placed it in a drawer and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. 2 nights ago, I heard the voice again, same soft melodic lullaby, drifting through the air like it had years ago. This time though, it wasn't outside my window. It was in my house, just outside my bedroom door. I froze, too terrified to move, as the voice called my name over and over, growing louder with each repetition. When I finally mustered the courage to open the door, there was nothing there. Just the dark, empty hallway. But on the floor, right outside my bedroom, was a red balloon, bobbing slightly as someone had just let it go. I knew then that this wasn't over, that whatever haunted that town hadn't forgotten me. It had found me again, and this time, it wouldn't let go. Last night, I made a decision. I'm going back to that town, back to where it all started. I don't know what I'll find, but I can't keep running. Whatever this thing is, it's coming for me, and if I'm going to stop it, I need to confront it. I booked a ticket for the first flight out tomorrow morning. I haven't told anyone where I'm going. I'm not sure I'll come back. But there's one thing I know for certain. I'm not the only one it's after. And if I don't do something, if I don't end this, it will keep hunting, keep feeding, until there's nothing left. So if you're reading this, be careful. Pay attention to the signs, the missing children, the voices, the balloons, and if you ever hear a lullaby in the night, don't listen. Whatever you do, don't follow it. Because once it finds you, it never lets you go. I participated in a dark web treasure hunt. It was a stupid ass decision. For my birthday, I decided to treat myself to a dark web mystery box gift. It was a service I'd used several times before and they have never disappointed, sending heaps of useless but funny things to my doorstep. Happy birthday, Trevor, a note on the box read. I picked up the package placed on my doorstep and noticed a letter attached to it. There comes a time in every man's life where their skills and knowledge has to be tested. With that in mind, I shall set you out on a treasure hunt. Please follow the instructions within the box, and for safety reasons, burn every letter once it has been read or solved. To my surprise, the note was signed by Pete, my best friend since childhood. It was a neat surprise, but I was confused as to how exactly he'd gotten involved with the anonymous service. Whether he was just an active user there himself who'd recognized me, or if he'd been contacted by the website, I didn't know. Nevertheless, it seemed like a cool gift. My first clue would simply be a piece of paper with 2 incoherent words written on it. Van Mace. Could it be a name? Maybe a location? I sat down with it and contemplated the words in front of me. After just a minute, I realized it was an anagram. The letters just had to be rearranged to form a new meaning. Man cave was the hidden message. It was a reference to Pete's basement, a place we'd frequently spend our Saturday nights playing video games and drinking whiskey. I burned the letter in accordance with the instructions and quickly made my way to the man cave. There, I used my spare key to unlock the door, half expecting a surprise party. Instead, all I found was another clue. An ace of spades and a picture. Both were pinned to a board with an unfamiliar knife. I removed the knife and checked out the clues. The picture itself was a place that we frequently went with friends to smoke and relax. A beautiful field which no one knew about. It was just a short hike outside the city. I made my way there in about an hour. Our usual place was hidden in the shade beneath some trees. Once there, I noticed a shovel sticking out of the ground on top of some fresh dirt. Spade, ace of spades, very creative, I chuckled to myself. Without hesitation, I picked it up and started digging through the ground. After less than a minute, I hit something solid. Expecting another clue, I bent down and brushed the dirt away. As I put my hand on the cold surface, I immediately retracted it in shock. It was Pete, buried underneath the dirt, dead from multiple stab wounds to his chest. In shock, I called the police, devastated by the loss of my best friend. While I waited, I sat down and tried to figure out what the hell had happened. That's when I realized I had burned every note and that my fingerprints were all over the murder scene, from the strange knife in the basement to the key and the shovel itself used to bury him. I'd been set up. I think my uncle murdered his daughter. Nobody bats an eye when the old get sick. It's the way of the world after all. You're born, slowly grow old, then you die. Sure, people will mourn. A few people may even weep at your funeral, and if you're lucky, someone will lay an occasional flower on your headstone. But when the young die, that's a completely different story. My little cousin Olivia was only 6 years old when she fell down the stairs of her 2-story house. The fall had snapped her neck somewhere along those 15 fateful steps. It was her mother who had found her tiny body. I could only imagine the horror she felt when her eyes met the sight of little Olivia's neck at a 90-degree angle. The thought made my spine shiver. My Aunt Lizzie now sobbed uncontrollably as we sat in the little chapel. Olivia's casket opened for the few people who knew her in life to come to say goodbye. If Olivia had died an old woman, the chapel might be overflowing, but in 6 short years, she had not made many connections in her brief life. While many relatives were present, only a handful would come to know Olivia as well as I had come to know her. I had been her designated babysitter for many years. Her little lungs drew breath, so my heart shattered when I got the news. My Uncle Jesse spoke for his daughter in our hour of suffering. Olivia was a cheerful, energetic, and playful little kid. Her enthusiasm for life brought joy to anyone in her vicinity. Life can be cruel, unjust, and inhumane, but it's not our place to judge the work of the man upstairs. When it's your time, when he calls you up, when God needs you back, we can only heed the call. Olivia was too precious for this world. I believe our Heavenly Father knew that. That is why I can smile knowing that my little girl is in a better place. I don't know how he could be so calm and composed while talking about his recently departed daughter. She wasn't even my daughter, and even my voice cracked whenever I spoke her name. He must have had a heart of stone, I thought to myself. Who am I to judge how someone mourned the passing of their little girl? After all, we are all different. Those who wish to say one last goodbye to Olivia, please do so now. The casket will be closed in a few short minutes, the funeral director informed. The rustling of a few people standing sounded over my Aunt Lizzie's sobbing. I didn't want to go up and see Olivia's body in that state, but my aunt clutched my arm and pulled me with her for more support. How could I refuse? The line leading up to the casket began to thin, and soon we were faced with little Olivia's peaceful sleeping face. She wore a pristine white dress that seemed to blend with the casket's padding. Her satin black hair created a deep contrast with the casket's insides. Her skin looked cold and glazed over. Aunt Lizzie's head dropped onto Olivia as she gave her little girl one last worldly embrace. Why, Lord, why? Tears streamed down onto Olivia's dress, darkening some of the areas where they soaked into the fabric. I comforted my aunt and could not help but shed my tears as well. The memories of little Olivia were playing in my mind. Olivia, oh Olivia, my aunt cried. I looked down at Olivia's sleeping face, never expecting her to react to her mother's calls. Olivia, my Olivia. As the last A of her name left her mother's mouth, her eyes snapped open, thrusting my heart into the pit of my stomach. My eyes instantly dried up in my terror. Then Olivia's pupils trained their gaze on me. I wanted to do nothing more than to scream, but as I opened my mouth, the sound never managed to bypass the lump in my throat. I let my Aunt Lizzie go, taking a step backward in the process. Just then, I knocked into someone. My head shot around to see my Uncle Jesse looking at his daughter's face, unfazed by her soulless stare. He then looked at me with an expressionless face and gave me a smile of pity, before returning to his daughter's facade. I shot back around to look at Olivia, but once again was met with her peacefully sleeping expression. What the fuck? I thought to myself. Olivia was just, I must have imagined it. It must have been my imagination. What other explanation could there be? My uncle's cold hand snaked across my shoulders in an attempt to comfort me, and it did, before he whispered in my ear, "It will be our little secret. You will tell no one of this." For the rest of the funeral, I was in a state of constant shock, trying to make sense of the situation but never could. It had been a week since Olivia had died. They had pumped her body full of embalming fluid, and I'd even ran over the coroner's report. A complete evisceration of the C1 and C2 vertebrae, resulting in a complete severance of the spinal cord, pronounced dead at the scene. There was no way Olivia could still be alive. Absolutely no way. Those words played in my head as the first few pails of earth began to blanket her coffin. But my resolve was constantly questioned by Uncle Jesse's 1,000-mile stare from across the freshly dug hole. There is no way Olivia is still alive. My Aunt Lizzie continued in her emotional state long after Olivia had died. It's not hard to imagine given that Olivia was only a child. Aunt Lizzie and Uncle Jesse's lives revolved around my little cousin. I tried my best to stay away. It was hard for me to hear her shrieking cries. As much as I loved Aunt Lizzie, there's only so much sadness a person can take. I preferred to push little Olivia as far out of my mind as I could. Well, there was that, but also Uncle Jesse's comment on the day of the funeral. I tried to dismiss it as being part of my imagination, but no matter how hard I tried, his words were as clear as that day they tickled my ear. It will be our little secret. That fear, however, would have to be put on the back burner, because Aunt Lizzie had called me over to help get rid of some of Olivia's things. Looking at them had brought too much grief to her heart, and she was having a hard time boxing them up, so it was up to me to lend a helping hand. I walked into their house, the same house where I'd babysat Olivia so many times. Everywhere I looked, memories of that little girl flooded back into my mind. Then my eyes met the bottom of the stairs. I couldn't help but imagine her little body sprawled out on the hardwood floor. A door creaked open, and I jolted in my uneasiness. It was Aunt Lizzie stepping out of the master bedroom, situated on the first floor. Her eyes were puffy, she'd been crying, and she attempted to compose herself before greeting me with a warm smile. Our conversation was brief. She'd only given me instructions on what to box up. To my surprise, her instructions were to get rid of everything but Olivia's twin bed. She disappeared into her bedroom, and I thought I heard her faintly sobbing through the door. I trained my eyes on the top of the stairs, precariously stepping around where I'd imagine Olivia drew her last breath. There was a sense of apprehension as I reached the second floor, and I swore the air was colder as my foot graced the last step. But I pushed it out of my mind as I plunged myself into the task at hand. There was a lot to box up. I saw my breath condense in front of my face. The air temperature had plunged drastically. I felt my skin pimple and goosebumps, not because of the cold, but because a familiar figure graced the edge of my eye. Standing in the corner was a little girl wearing a white dress. Olivia? Her skin was no longer the same color as the day the casket's lid fell on her restful face. It was pale, icy, and cold. The mortician had done a fantastic job of styling her hair, but it now draped over much of her face in an unkempt way. She lifted her head, but before it could reach its full extension, it slumped over with a loud crack. Likewise, her cervical spine now pointed to the ceiling as it poked through the skin on her neck. Her head may have been resting on her shoulder, but her eyes looked at me with the same intensity as the day I swore I saw her open them while she lay in that tiny little box. I fell onto her bed, cowering backward until the drywall caressed my rear. Our eyes stayed there for what felt like hours. In reality, it was only seconds. Little Olivia raised a jagged finger, pointing to her nightstand beside her bed. I was too fearful to let go of my knees that were pressed up against my chest, but Olivia did not waver. She stood there steadfast, her eyes planted on me, her finger gesturing at the nightstand. I wasn't going to be let go until I investigated whatever she needed me to see. I cautiously unfurled myself out of my beetle position and crawled my way over to the first drawer, pulling it out while making sure Olivia wasn't going to jump on me. Inside were many of Olivia's crayon drawings. Many were family portraits, and some I'd even helped draw myself on the many nights I babysat. But as I flipped through the pieces, they became less wholesome and more strange. There was a stick figure of a little girl crying, a pair of eyes peering at the girl through the door, a drawing of a man, evident in the stick figure touting a beard, covered in blood. I'm pretty sure it was my Uncle Jesse, and a picture that made my heart sink. The little stick figure drawn girl crying in a corner as Mommy and Daddy fought. I looked over at Olivia, but her finger had not been lowered. I flipped the page one more time and was met by a drawing of Uncle Jesse caressing a little girl with her head flopped over to the side, the mummy stick figure off to the side weeping. I looked back over at my little cousin as her finger finally lowered. "Did Uncle Jesse do this to you?" I questioned, but she made no gestures. I returned my eyes to the drawing. It must have been, I thought to myself. That would explain why Uncle Jesse was acting so unfazed at the funeral, and why he didn't want Olivia coming back from the grave. So she came to you too, huh? My head swiveled to the bedroom door. It was Uncle Jesse, standing there as I held Olivia's testimonial in my hand. I looked over the corner where Olivia once stood, but she was gone. You killed Olivia?" I quivered. "No, McKenna, it's not like that. Let me explain." I inched back to the far edge of the twin bed, ready to run at a moment's notice. "What do you mean she came to me too?" I questioned. "McKenna, calm down. Let me explain. I need to tell someone about this. I don't know what to make of it." He stepped to me, outstretching his hands. "I have to get out of here. I know what he's done. I'm next," I thought to myself. As soon as a large enough opening presented itself, I darted behind Uncle Jesse, out of the door, down the stairs, and out of the house, all while looking over my shoulder, but Uncle Jesse never gave chase. I was numb the whole ride home, reliving all the encounters I had with Uncle Jesse throughout the years. He loved Olivia so much. How could he do such a thing? I don't even know how I made it home in that condition. It's as if I made it home on instinct. But as my tires came to a halt in my driveway, I remembered. Aunt Lizzie was still in that house with that monster. I had to warn her. Before I could get to the phone, it rang. The caller ID said, "Aunt Lizzie." Had he gotten to her already and was calling to taunt me from her phone? How could I be so stupid? I left her behind to die. I carefully lifted the phone to my ear and answered the call. "He's dead. Your Uncle Jesse is dead," Aunt Lizzie cried through a mountain of gut-wrenching tears. A few weeks had passed and I'd decided to move in with my Aunt Lizzie. She was all alone in the world now. I was the only family she had left. She wouldn't eat, she wouldn't speak, she just sat there looking at some random wall. It didn't help that the world had this strange sense of irony. You see, my Uncle Jesse had fallen down those same steps as Olivia, and in the same gory fashion, his neck snapped like a twig. I felt like there was some poetic justice in how it all happened, but I wish it didn't affect Aunt Lizzie so much. She started to make some progress in her mourning process. I no longer had to hand feed her for every meal. She made sure to down a few sips of soup every once in a while. She no longer laid in bed until dinner. Noon was often the latest, and her gaze began to unglue itself from the plain white walls. Everything was progressing splendidly. That is until the night they showed up. Aunt Lizzie sat on the couch watching Saturday Night Live, the only thing that seemed to tug at the edges of her mouth. As I cleaned up after our broccoli cheddar chicken supper, it was my favorite dish to cook and one of the few solids my Aunt Lizzie could stomach. But it sure was a hassle to clean up. I scrubbed and scrubbed the pan, but the breadcrumbs were baked on like old gum on concrete. I plowed my soapy sponge into the sink as I gave a frustrated grunt. I needed something more drastic to clean the pan. I needed my wire brush. I kept it in the cabinet above the fridge, but as I turned around to get it, I gave an ear-piercing shriek. On the other side of the kitchen stood Olivia and Uncle Jesse. Their heads flopped over to the side in almost identical fashion. The decay on Olivia's face was now more prominent, but Jesse's was fresher and less weathered. Though still pale, cold, and grotesque like Olivia's on the day I saw her in the bedroom. Little Olivia held her father's hand by the finger. Uncle Jesse stood paralyzed. That is, until we moved towards the notepad magnetically stuck to the fridge. He scribbled a few words on the paper and stepped back to let me read what he'd written. "You didn't let me explain." I looked back over to him in confusion. Little Olivia tugged on his pant leg, gesturing to let her write on the notepad next. The father passed the notepad down to her as she pulled her personal crayon from the dress's little pocket. I saw her face concentrate as she wrote some of the words she knew how to write. When she finished, she flipped the pad over to me. It was hard for me to read it with it being a mix of lowercase and capital letters, not to mention the grammatical mistakes. It read, "Mummy did it." I read over her writing again and again until it finally clicked. Mummy did it. It was all clear to me now. Little Olivia was not trying to warn me about her father, but about her mother. Uncle Jesse wasn't trying to kill me on the day he died. He was trying to explain that he had suspicions about what had actually happened to his daughter. Olivia had given her father the same warning, but it had been too late. Just then, the father and daughter duo raised their fingers simultaneously, pointing behind me. The sound of a drawer opening, along with rattling of utensils, met my ear. I pivoted slowly. Her eyes were no longer void, no longer sad. Now they were trained on me. My Aunt Lizzie had found a very large kitchen knife and started to approach me. Never order a mystery box from the dark web. Boredom is hitting everyone hard right now, with social distancing a top priority. We are all finding interesting ways to keep ourselves occupied. I think I may have ventured a little too much, though. It all started 3 weeks ago. Sitting in my bedroom, I tossed a softball into the air for a few minutes before I sat up on the edge of my bed. I looked over at my laptop I had been neglecting since I dropped out of college. I turned it on and began surfing. Nothing much had changed on the net. I visited all the regular sites I used to: Pinterest, YouTube, Tumblr. I thought about what I could do with that piece of technology. This triggered a craving I had had for a long time, the want to visit the dark web. I had heard only terrible things. It's a place to find organs, drugs, and weapons. I had no use for any of those things, but still, curiosity got the best of me. Before I knew it, I was downloading the browser that would bridge my access. Aside from all those scary things I could find on the dark web, I had seen some videos a while back about mystery boxes. You can pay anywhere from $5 to hundreds of dollars for a plain brown box filled with goodies. The contents were undisclosed, hence the mystery part. This could be something fun, as it was definitely enticing. A 5-minute search landed me on a site that had exactly what I was looking for. Now, I did not have as much cash to just blow, so I had a modest budget of $20. I searched through countless sellers, although I could not exactly tell you why. There was no way of determining which would be the best option, since the descriptions were quite vague. Still, I was a little nervous I was flushing a crisp Jackson down the toilet. Knowing my luck, I'd receive a box with a piece of chewed up bubblegum inside. My laptop was one of those you could fold in half and turn into a tablet. So I decided for fate to choose my purchase. I entered my budget in the filters and converted my laptop to tablet form. I closed my eyes and swiped my finger upwards, then pressed down to make my selection. The selection was not all that great, but I was tired of searching already. I read through what was available. Mystery box, life-changing. Valued at, priceless. My loss, your gain, smiley face. Sounded good enough to me as I typed in my credit card information, name, and address, as if my body was not agreeing with what I was commanding. The box arrived just 3 days later. I could hardly contain my excitement as I carried it into my bedroom. I sat it on my bed and studied it a bit. No return address, typical. My fingernails began picking at the tape and tearing it away. Pulling the flaps apart revealed sparkly tissue paper. Cute. The contents inside, not so cute. It was a muddy pair of shoes, no big deal I guess, but it was a little weirder that the pair of shoes seemed brand new. The soles were not worn out, the tongue did not have the crease and the wrinkles that you would expect, and the insides were almost spotless. The next item was a tiny black crushed velvet bag, the kind of bags you pull closed with strings. The feeling was not very impressive. I shook the bag around a bit and thought it sounded like little rocks inside. I pulled the mouth apart and poured out the contents into my hand. An audible "fuck" escaped my lips. My hand flipped over to break the contact it had with my skin. They scattered. Teeth? Really? I let my body rid the creeps by giving a little shiver. I peered back into the box. One more item remained. A diamond ring. Maybe this box wasn't such a dud after all. I'm no jeweler, but I did know that a quick look at the band of authentic gold would most likely result in finding the carats in small print. 18K, not bad. I sized up the ring, which was visibly small. I wondered if I could have it altered. I might as well get something usable out of this. The next day, I carried my small finding to a local jewelry shop. I inquired about the authenticity, which they verified. A small fee, and a day later, I was sporting new ice. I was pleased with my purchase enough to leave a modest review to my seller, but when I tried to rate him or her, my laptop froze up. I tried everything I could to reboot with no success. Holding down the power button, closing and reopening, pressing a combination of keys. Finally, I gave up and let it do its own thing. An hour later, it finally powered off and restarted. I blew this off as a mandated update. The screen displayed the typical downloading files followed by a slow restarting bar filling horizontally. After all that mess, I did not bother to revisit the website. I had probably caught a bug on the damn thing and was lucky it still worked at all. My day was interrupted by a knock on the door. At the other side of my door stood a man who towered over me. I only poked my head out and placed my hand on the outside of the door, almost hugging it, obviously uncomfortable with an unexpected visitor. The man at the door verified my name, then asked if I would follow him down to the station, just to ask me a few questions. Station? What station? I asked. The police station, he responded. In the middle of us talking, I noticed that he was staring at my hand, which I jerked away, still unconvinced with what this was all regarding. Regardless, I was too scared to question him, and did as he asked. We arrived at the police station where I was guided into a small room. Only a desk and 3 chairs were inside, a video camera in the corner. The officer proceeded to ask me questions. Where I was on some night 3 years prior, where I was on some night 8 months prior, if I knew a young woman by the name of Selena Ramos, if I was familiar with a lady named Melody Stacy. It was all a bit much to take in, but I gladly obliged, as I had no idea where they were going. I knew I had done nothing wrong. I knew I had nothing to hide. I knew that the faster I answered their questions, the faster it would all be over with. I remained in that room for hours. He asked me the same questions in different formats, in an attempt to catch me in a lie. He asked for my permission to search my home, grab what they needed, give my fingerprints, all that good stuff. Again, as I had nothing to hide, I agreed. Trying to explain where the things came from was no use. They only circled back to my search history. They claimed to know this was my scapegoat and even advised me I wasn't going to get out of this one. The officer stated, "We are not buying your bullshit. There was no black web visited from your computer. There is no purchase made from Wolves 382. Just face it, we got you. That was enough to make my tears stop. I cocked my head sideways and said, "Excuse me? What did you say?" I continued, "Wolves 384? How did you know the name of the seller?" I couldn't even remember the name of the seller. For a millisecond, I saw him swallow a heavy gulp, then he fixed his tie. "Cut it out. You told me." "That's what you said when we were at your house," he said. No, you're lying. I didn't say shit. You didn't even tell me why you were there. Why the fuck would I bring that up?" Like clockwork, a second detective enters the room and interrupts me. He doesn't say anything besides officially putting me under arrest for kidnapping, murder, and false imprisonment. I believe there was more, but I did not catch everything. My surroundings became fuzzy. I felt like I was going to be sick, and my hearing was fading in and out. I just spoke with my lawyer. He says they have a solid case against me. They found Selena's teeth in my apartment. They caught me with Melody's wedding ring, and the shoes they had photographs of me throwing away matched the shoe prints left at Melody's crime scene. My laptop had gruesome photos of their bloated and rotted bodies. My search history was criminal, such as how to frame someone for murder and how to hack someone's computer. Not to mention the anonymous tip they have on file claiming I had gotten drunk one night and confessed to the murders. I don't even fucking drink. Worst of all, being such an introvert and loner, I have no way to prove my locations for the dates provided. There's no use. I stand warned that I need to sign a plea or risk the death penalty. The cases have been going for years now. The government is just ready to solve it, and nothing closes a case better than a guilty plea. The last message. I never really believed in paranormal things or anything like that. I'm the kind of person who would be the last to believe in such things. But what happened to me that night changed everything. It was around 10 p.m. I was comfortably settled on the couch watching a series on Netflix. The soft light from the screen illuminated the room, while the silence of the house was broken by only the characters' voices. My phone was beside me when it suddenly vibrated. Instinctively, I picked it up and saw a message from an unknown number, a number that definitely was not in my contacts. Curiosity took over. When I opened the conversation, a wave of dread washed over me. You were being watched. I tried to convince myself that it was just a friend playing a prank, but the idea quickly faded when another message arrived. Look out the window. I thought about ignoring it. It was just some random number, and the idea of looking outside felt very risky. But a strange sensation, like a voice inside urging me to act, led me to rise. The night was dark, and I could see nothing beyond the shadows of my own bushes. Another message. Now you don't see. Anxiety settled in my chest. I replied, almost pleading, "What do you want from me?" A quick response came. "Leave me alone." The tension escalated, as if the atmosphere around me were thickening. Then the next message made me freeze. "Come to the back door." My heart raced. I walked to the back, the feeling of being watched growing with each step. I sent a message. "I'm here." The silence was deafening. With a courage I didn't know I had, I opened the door. My backyard was well lit, but the darkness seemed to swallow everything around me. The air felt heavy, and there was a sweet, almost nauseating smell that made me uneasy. "Now you see," the message echoed in my mind. I looked into the darkness. At first, nothing. But then, something caught my eye in the bushes. I put on my glasses, trying to see better. What I saw made my blood run cold. A humanoid figure, distorted and shadowy, was there, watching me. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but deep voids that seemed to absorb the light. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and before I could react, the figure sprinted towards me. I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately, my heart pounding wildly. The thing banged on the door with tremendous force, a sound echoing as if it was testing the house's resistance. Then silence. I called the police while making sure all the windows were secure. I peeked through the peephole, but saw nothing. The darkness now felt denser, as if it were alive. The police arrived, but found nothing. Relief mixed with confusion made no sense. After they left, I couldn't sleep. What was that thing? What did it want? The messages continued to echo in my mind like a constant whisper reminding me I wasn't alone. The next day, I received another message, this one without warning. You thought you were free? The moment of peace I longed never came. Days dragged on and the messages kept coming. Sometimes they were just unsettling words, I am close, or you cannot escape. But other times, they were distorted images, as if someone were trying to show me the very essence of terror. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed to find out what was happening. I started researching stories of hauntings, abductions, and strange sightings. I discovered accounts of people who had encountered similar figures, beings that seemed to feed off fear, hiding in the shadows, always watching, and always waiting. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone vibrated again. It was a message. You still don't understand. The air felt heavier and the temperature dropped abruptly. A sense of despair overwhelmed me. I went to the window and looked outside. The darkness seemed to pulse as if it were alive. And then I saw it, the figure, now closer and clear. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a grotesque creature with scaly skin and eyes that looked like two deep holes, empty and full with malice. The creature smiled, and I realized the true terror was just beginning. In the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "You should never have looked." I came to Reddit to seek help and advice on what to do. I can't sleep with that feeling of being watched. That sinister smile is still in my head. If anyone has encountered that thing and managed to survive, please help me. The Watcher in the Window. Eric and his wife Lisa had always dreamed of living in the countryside, away from the noise and chaos of the city. So when they found a charming old farmhouse nestled on a quiet road surrounded by woods, it seemed perfect. The house was beautiful, if a bit worn, with large windows that overlooked a serene field. It was everything they had hoped for. The first few weeks were peaceful. They spent their days fixing up the house, enjoying the fresh air, and getting to know their new, quiet life. But as the days grew shorter and the nights darker, Eric began to notice something odd. Every evening, just after sunset, he'd feel a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as though he were being watched. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia, just getting used to the isolation, but the feeling persisted. Whenever he looked out the large window facing the field, he felt certain that someone was standing there, just beyond the edge of the woods. One night, unable to shake the sensation, Eric stood by the window, staring into the dark expanse of the field. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the grass. For a long time, there was nothing. But just as he was about to turn away, he saw it. A figure, standing far out in the field, motionless. It was too distant to make out clearly, but it was tall and human-like. "Lisa," he called out. His voice was uneasy. "Come look at this." Lisa came to the window, squinting into the distance. "I don't see anything. Eric, are you sure?" Eric blinked, and the figure was gone. The field was empty. He tried to laugh it off, convincing himself it was just a trick of the light, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Over the next few nights, the figure returned. It would appear at dusk, standing a little closer each time, always watching. Eric began dreading sunset, unable to shake the feeling that the figure was coming for them. He stopped mentioning it to Lisa, not wanting to scare her, but the lack of sleep and consistent anxiety were wearing on him. One evening, as they were having dinner, Lisa glanced out the window and froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Eric," she whispered, "there's someone out there." He looked up, his stomach dropping. The figure was closer now, standing just at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the fading light. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs and a featureless face, just a dark shape staring at them. They both ran to the door, but when they flung it open, the yard was empty. No footprints in the soft ground, no rustling in the trees, nothing. The next night, the figure was even closer, standing just outside the window, its long fingers nearly brushing the glass. Eric felt a cold sweat break out across his body as he stared into the thing's blank face. He knew, without knowing how, that it was waiting, watching. That night, Eric woke with a start. The room was cold, the kind of chill that cuts through your bones. He glanced at the clock, 3:12 a.m. Something felt wrong, and then he heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap. Eric's breath caught in his throat. The sound was coming from the window. Slowly, he turned his head. There on the other side of the glass was the figure. It was closer than ever, pressed against the window, its head tilted unnaturally, as though it was studying him. Its hand was resting on the glass, fingers tapping rhythmically. For a moment, Eric couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He stared at the thing in horrified disbelief, his heart pounding in his ears. Then, with a sudden burst of terror, he grabbed Lisa's arm, shaking her awake. "Lisa, wake up. It's here." Lisa opened her eyes groggily, but before she could ask what was happening, a loud crack echoed through the room. The window shattered, glass spraying across the room. The figure was gone, but the cold air rushed in, biting at their skin. Panicking, they fled the house, jumped into their car, and driving through the night without looking back. They never returned to the farmhouse. When they called the police the next morning, no one believed their stories. The officers found nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry, only the shattered window. But Eric knew what he had seen, and so did Lisa. And sometimes, late at night, when he's alone, Eric can still hear it. The soft tap, 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 just outside the window, always watching, always waiting. The cabin past the ponds. There's a stretch of woods not too far from where I live, where the trees grow so thick you can't see much past 10 feet in any direction. I had hiked the woods before, but never went far. It's all ponds, packed together like they're trying to choke out the sky, and the farther you walk into them, the darker it gets. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a way to clear my head. I'd had a shitty week, work was kicking my ass, and my girlfriend had just left me. She said I was distant and disconnected. I couldn't argue with her. I felt off for months. It was like everything was just a little out of sync, like I was living a half a second behind everyone else. So I drove out to the woods, hoping the quiet might help. It was late afternoon when I started walking. The sun was still up, but by the time I hit the tree line, the pine swallowed it. The air got cooler and the shadows longer, and every step felt like it took me farther from the world I knew. But that's what I wanted. A little space, a little distance. I walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper until I started to wonder whether I could find my way back. That's when I saw it, the cabin. It was barely visible through the pines, just a dark shape nestled between the trunks, like it had been there forever, forgotten by the world. I walked past the trees to the clearing where the cabin was. The wood was gray with age, the roof sagging, and one of the windows was shattered. It didn't look welcoming, but something about it drew me in. I stepped out of the trees and onto the overgrown path leading to the cabin's front door. I should have turned around. I don't know why I didn't. I just wanted to look inside. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. There was hardly any light except for the dim glow filtering through the trees outside. The floor was covered in dirt and debris. Broken glass, leaves, something that might have been bones, though I didn't look too closely. I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the small space, but then I heard it again. First a shuffle, then a breath, and then a voice. "Welcome, stranger." I froze. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it came from deep inside the cabin. My heart stammered in my chest. "Oh, I'm sorry," I stammered. and then I turned to leave, but the door had swung shut behind me, trapping me in the dark. The voice came again, clearer this time. "You've come far, but this is where you stay." I couldn't see anyone, but I felt something, a presence. It was not friendly. Like they were sinking into the floor, and the air around me seemed to thicken. My head swam, and suddenly, I wasn't sure where I was. The cabin felt wrong, like it wasn't just a building, but something alive, something watching. I took a step back, my foot crunching on the debris beneath me, and that's when I noticed it. The cabin was changing. The walls began to shift, move, and change direction. The room almost felt like it was breathing, expanding and contracting in slow, shallow breaths. The windows, where there should have been fading light from the outside, were now pitch black, as if the cabin had disappeared into a void. And the floor beneath my feet, it wasn't just dirt and debris anymore. It was stone, cold, damp stone. I don't know how long I stood there, watching the impossible changes, but when I turned around, the front door was gone. In its place was a hallway, a long, narrow corridor stretching out into the dark. The voice came again, closer now. "Keep going." I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. My feet moved on their own, carrying me down the hall, the walls pressing in on me as I went. The deeper I went, the more everything around me twisted. The floor sloped at impossible angles. The walls pulsed like they were alive, and the air grew thicker, harder to breathe. And the voice, God, the voice, it followed me, whispering things I couldn't understand, words that didn't make sense but filled me with dread. By the time I reached the end of the hall, I wasn't even sure if I was still in the cabin. The space around me was wrong, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The walls were lined with symbols, crude, jagged things carved into the wood and stone, symbols that seemed to shift when I looked away. My head ached, and time wasn't right anymore. I checked my phone, but the screen was blank. No signal, no time, no nothing. My watch had stopped, its hands frozen in place. I couldn't tell how long I'd been there. Minutes, hours, days. It didn't matter. There was no escape. At the end of the hallway, there was a door, old and rotted, hanging on the rusty hinges. I didn't want to open it, but the voice, now right beside me, breathing in my ear, left me no choice. Open it. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. The door swung open on its own, revealing a room. The room was white, bright white. White walls, white floor, and a bright white light, and a single metal chair. And sitting in the chair was me. I don't know how to explain it. It was me, but old, gaunt, and pale, like I hadn't seen sunlight in years. My eyes were sunken, my skin stretched tight over my bones. The other me looked up, meeting my gaze, and smiled. "Finally," he said. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. "Sit," the voice said. It wasn't just in my head anymore, it was coming from the other me. I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me. There was nowhere to go. The other me stood, moving with a slow, deliberate grace, and stepped towards me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The other me reached out, his hand cold and clammy, and touched my shoulder. The moment he did, everything changed. I was in the chair now, looking at the door, the same door I'd just come through. I could feel the presence all around me, the same cold, malevolent force that had followed me from the moment I entered the cabin. I waited for what felt like an eternity, stuck in that chair. It felt as if decades passed, and I watched my body grow old, gaunt, and pale. And then the door opened, and someone stepped in. It was me. Again. The cabin, this place, it traps you. It twists you. It breaks you. And then it makes you part of it. A loop, an endless cycle of fear and confusion of watching yourself walk through the door over and over again, knowing what was coming, but powerless to stop it. The voice spoke one last time as I watched myself approach the chair. Welcome home. I feel like I was in a loop for centuries. Time doesn't work the same way in the cabin. It's endless. Every moment stretches out for an eternity. And yet, it all blurs together. I've lost track of how many times I've watched myself walk through that door and sit in this chair, growing old until I can't walk through the door again. Every time myself approaches the chair, I'm then in the chair again, but younger. I began to feel a change. The presence, though it never spoke to me again, didn't feel like it was watching me anymore, almost as if it was distracted. I could feel it shifting its focus somewhere. I didn't understand why until the door creaked open. It wasn't me this time. It was someone else, someone new, someone fresh. He was younger than me, maybe in his early 20s, with shaggy hair and a confused expression on his face. He looked around the room like I had when I first came here. His eyes were wide with fear and disbelief, and then he saw me, sitting in the chair. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him to turn back, to run, but the words wouldn't come. I could only watch as he moved closer. Then, for the first time, I felt like I had control over my body again. I stood up, facing the man. I knew what I was supposed to do. I placed my hand on his shoulder, like the older me had done the first time I entered. Though, was it the first time? Through tired breath, I forced out the words, "It's your turn." The man was then in the chair, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, I crossed the threshold back out into the hallway to leave the cabin. I turned one last time to the room, to the man, a look of terror in his eyes, his body now paralyzed in the chair. "I'm sorry," I said to him before turning. Leaving the cabin, I no longer felt as if the presence was watching me. I knew it was done with me, its focus now on its new prize. The moment I stepped out the cabin, the air changed. The oppressive weight lifted completely, and the suffocating darkness that had surrounded me for so long was gone. I was back in the woods, standing under a sky that was now a brilliant, blinding blue. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The pine swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped overhead, and the world felt real again. But it should have been different. After everything I'd endured, surely the world outside had changed. Surely centuries had passed. With shaky legs, I made my way out of the pines. My car was still parked at the edge of the woods, right where I'd left it. The trees looked the same, the path untouched. Even the air smelled the same, crisp and cool like it had that first afternoon when I walked into the forest. I pulled out my phone. The screen flickered to life, displaying the date and time. It had only been a few hours. I looked at myself in the camera, and I looked fine. My breath hitched and I stumbled back, staring at the device in disbelief. Somehow, despite everything I'd been through, despite the endless time I'd felt trapped in that hellish loop, almost no time passed at all. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I drove home in a daze, the events of the cabin swirling in my mind. When I pulled into my driveway, everything was the same. The neighbors' cars were parked where they always were. The street was quiet and familiar. But I know what happened. I know that place, whatever it is, exists. And somehow, impossibly, I've been given another chance. But I know one thing, I will never step foot back into those woods. I know if I do, I might not be lucky enough to get out a second time. And if you ever find yourself walking through the pines and you see a cabin, run. I buy people's souls off the dark web. I used to be a normal person. I just want to get that out clear first of all. I had a few strange hobbies, but when all this started out, I was just like your average Joe. One of my strange hobbies was browsing the deep web. It was mostly out of curiosity, let me assure you. I wasn't involved in anything shady and also made sure to take adequate precautions. One day I was just looking at random web pages when I stumbled upon a curious one. Hello there, are you perhaps interested in buying other people's souls? I've been collecting people's souls for a very long time, and I have a bit extra. It was one of the most basic web pages that you could imagine, with only one address on where to send the Bitcoin to buy one. I laughed when I saw this. I had seen my share of scams on the deep web, but this was a new one. I went to close the window before something popped up on my screen. Hello there, I see you browsing my website. My heart nearly froze as I saw it was a chat box. but I was sure the security measures I had taken were sufficient to prevent someone from tracking me or hacking into my computer. How did this pop-up appear out of nowhere then? Relax, I just noticed that you were going to leave without buying anything. It seems you haven't been convinced what I'm selling is real. Why not try a free sample? A simple yes and no dialog box appeared. Now I should have clicked on no, but in my curiosity, I clicked on yes. A bad decision in hindsight, but I wanted to know where this was going. And I was a bit too confident in my own ability to shield myself from danger lurking on the internet. It's rather hard to explain what possessing a soul is like. You probably think that a soul is immutable, or indestructible in other words, and you'd be right. In that moment I could tell in my head that I held a single soul, but there was also a way for me to manifest it in the real world. It appeared as a tiny ball of light, no bigger than the smallest bone in your pinky. I reached out to touch it, and a flood of memories entered my head. The soul was of a woman by the name of Alexandra Cortez, who did not have a very happy childhood and had escaped her home when she turned 16. A few bad decisions involving drugs and she had literally nothing left on her and was slowly dying. It was here that her memories became less clear. There was a strange shadow that I could see, but nothing clearer than that. Mind you, everything else that I could see had been as clear as if I was the one seeing it. But this figure was covered in what I could only describe as dark smog. She had sold her soul to this thing in exchange for money. The rest of her life was rather good. Not fantastic by any means, but it was still decent and paradise compared to what she had suffered earlier. It all ended one day when she was walking along a dark street corner and a man ambushed her. She died that night, though not before hours of torture at his hands. There was far more, of course. I had her entire life in my hands, but I only put down the important bits. Given her whole biography could fill up several books. That wasn't all though. I could hear her thoughts as I held her soul in my hand. She was pleading, begging me to let her go. Now you're probably wondering what the afterlife is like. I have to confess that I never found out, just that there was something beyond where souls could go. After listening to her pleadings, I agreed to let her go. Much as I said earlier, I can't really explain how I let her go, just that I did. She vanished before me, and the light also went away with her, leaving my mind completely clear. I thought what had happened was just some sort of odd hallucination. I hoped that it was. I didn't want to believe there was some monster collecting souls around on the internet. That wasn't until 4 days later when I got an anonymous email linking back to that site. Hello there, I hope you enjoyed your free sample. Perhaps you would like to purchase another? We're having a sale now. The mail confirmed for me that it wasn't some weird fever dream, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to make an actual purchase. I should have realized that something was wrong the moment I saw the prices. They were dirt cheap, which made very little sense given what I learned later on. I got the souls of 3 more women, and they were quite similar in many ways. Much like with Alexandra, I couldn't see the entity they sold their souls to properly. The amounts of money they got for their souls were quite staggering. I had barely paid 1/10 of that price. Again, that should have told me that something was off about this whole thing, but I was rather oblivious to the fact then. What I was more focused on was that they had all died in similar ways, by being ambushed by a man. They never saw his face though, but they had all died in agonizing ways. Letting their souls go free brought a certain peace to my mind. Kind of like animal rights activists who buy animals intended for slaughter and then release them. Except I was releasing these human souls not from death, but from damnation. I highly doubted whatever entity bought them in the first place was kind to them. I bought another one a few days afterward, and it was here that things took a dark turn. It was the soul of a man named Christopher. I don't want to share his full name here, but that wasn't what I was concentrating on. No, when I went through the memories of his life, I was sickened by what I saw. This man was a serial killer. Those 4 women I told you about earlier, he was the one who had killed them. He had done it to over 17 more. The mere thought of it made me want to throw up. I couldn't see the figure to whom he sold his soul to. He hadn't done it for money, no. He had been caught by the police and had exchanged his soul for getting out of jail. Some sort of legal loophole was there because the police didn't document a piece of evidence correctly and he was let go. and he killed again and again, 10 more victims before being caught and given the death penalty. Much like those before him, he begged not to be released, but no sort of comparison emerged in my mind. I was sickened by what he had done, and appalled that he had suffered so little compared to his victims. I took hold of his soul and wondered what I could do with it. I could now hear him pleading again in my mind, but I ignored that and lit the stove. I then dropped the small ball of light onto the flame. Oh, he definitely felt that. He couldn't die, but he could feel the flame consume him. I could hear his screams, and though at first I was disgusted with myself, I learned to live with it. This man had no regrets or remorse for what he had done, aside from the fact that he was dead. It became a daily routine. I would try to find new ways to torment him. I would stick him in the freezer. I would stab his soul with a knife. I even thought about buying acid from somewhere to dip him in, but that would have raised too many questions, so I gave up on that. I never really considered myself to be a vindictive person, but I think it was because I had been so close to some of his victims, and had felt all they felt when they died. Once you've held someone's soul in your hand, you can't help but get a little attached. Eventually, I got tired of this after a few weeks and let him go. But in case you're worried, I assure you he suffered 10 times worse than what he had dealt out. I then bought another soul a couple weeks later. This one belonged to a woman who had killed 3 of her own children. My heart was hardened from before, and I went about my way making sure she got what she deserved. It continued like that. Nearly every soul I bought was some sort of horrible criminal. I didn't get any innocence to release like I did earlier, and I was okay with that. I was no longer buying souls with the purpose of saving them from the clutches of a demon. I wanted the souls of sinners so that I could punish them. After a few times, it gave me a weird giddy feeling in my stomach whenever I would sit down and think about what I would do to them. Soon, my apartment had over 24 of them. I spent nearly every free waking hour tormenting them as much as I could. I had pretty much given up on all my other hobbies and even hanging out with my friends or family. There's no easy way to describe it, but there's something really amazing about owning someone else's soul once you get past how twisted it initially feels. To have so much power over someone else, it just feels incredible in a way I can't put into words. Not to mention there was little guilt involved since I knew the people I was lording over deserved everything they got. It was more addicting than anything I had ever tried before. Eventually, I ran into a small roadblock though. Prices for the souls increased exponentially. I should add, they were worth right about how much they should have been. I had already released a good number and was quite frustrated that I couldn't get my hands on some more. I got an email a few days after that. Hey there, champ. Seems that you're a bit short on cash lately, but since you've been such a great customer, I was thinking that you could have a few more of them for free. With a few strings attached, of course. I just need you to do a few things for me. Consider it a kind of job. I barely even read the conditions as I agreed to it. That was just how much I was hooked. Now, I have over 100 souls. I spend all my time dealing with them. My new boss, although I've never met him, is pretty great. I have a quota of how many souls I have to torture in a day, and so long as I do that, I can keep getting new ones. Not only that, but I also get paid to do this. I've quit my job and torture these people full time now. Not everything has been great though. I have noticed a few changes when it comes to my body. There are 2 small bumps on the top of my head that just won't go away. I've been meaning to go to a doctor, but I haven't found the time. My skin had begun to turn a shade of gray, and I feel something growing out of my back. But really, I can't be bothered with all of that. A new shipment of souls has come from the website, and I need to get to work on them. I don't want my new boss to become angry. And anyway, to be honest, I just really enjoy doing this. We heard a voice, then my stepsister got stuck. My stepdad Carl hates me. There's just no other way to put it. Matt, if you don't like it, go and live with your dad, Carl would yell, squinting at me through his wire-trimmed glasses, arms folded. I don't know where he is, though. I don't know him. He left when I was 7, I'd replied. That's not my problem, is it? I'm the breadwinner in this household, so if you want to live here, you'll do as I say. The chore schedule is strict: sweeping, doing the dishes, washing the car, dusting, vacuuming. Carl would find some fault with the quality of my work and call a house meeting to make clear that the piece of gravel he found on the kitchen floor was not acceptable. Had I even done the chores at all, or was I lying? My mom would sit there, eyes downcast, letting him get through his spiel. Evie, his daughter, my stepsister, would hover by the doorway, waiting to dash out of the room when he'd had his say. I learned long ago there is no way to win the argument, so I apologized and say it will never happen again, but it will. When he's out at his job as a mobile mechanic, I say as much to my mom, and she's well aware. He has his flaws, but he's practical, and in his heart he is good. He's been the closest thing you've had to a father, Matt. He took that responsibility when he didn't have to, she'd say smoothingly. In your heart, you're good, but you don't treat Evie like he treats me, I responded. Evie has a mother who shares the burden. It isn't my fault my dad ran away. That's how the conversation goes, around and around in circles. In fairness, my stepdad can be a dick to Evie too. He restricts our internet access. He doesn't let us have sugary snacks. He makes us lock our phones away in a cupboard at 9 p.m. sharp and sends us to bed. He bangs on the bathroom door if he deems we've been in the shower for too long. As a result, Evie and I have bonded. The rules push us together, and we've got a genuine friendship. She appreciates that I'm more hard done by. She'll smuggle me biscuits and tell me the Wi-Fi password, if she's managed to weasel the information out of Carl. Needless to say, the rules are subject to a degree of flexibility. He buys chocolate biscuits and Doritos for himself and can munch the whole bag in a night, spilling crumbs all over the sofa he's sprawled out on. I can hear the TV blaring till midnight sometimes. Strict and baleful as he has never laid a finger on any of us. Instead, he smashes objects and writes notes in capitalized font on the back of envelopes for me to discover in the morning. He screams and shouts in my face, sending the sour stench of his breath my way. I wonder if he's trying to provoke me to hit him, which would be absurd. He's pushing 5 foot tall and heavyset, and I'm a skinny 17-year-old who's far more interested in reading about the battles than fighting them. I'm used to his dramatic outbursts now, so that's why yesterday was so weird. Carl was trying to fix the pipes under the kitchen sink, while Evie pressed him for extra pocket money. He was grumbling and largely ignoring her until she mentioned something about the chest in the basement. Carl stopped his tinkering and slid out from underneath the counter. He towered over Evie, ominously silent. I was studying at the kitchen table, but stopped to watch. Carl's face, usually so snarling and pained when he was angry, was utterly blank. "What did you say?" he whispered. "I was just joking," I said. "I could sell the old chest in the basement to get some pocket money." "I'll say this once, Evie. You leave my chest alone." His eyes, cold as frozen planets, bore into Evie's for a moment longer. Then he went back to work. Evie left the room sobbing. I followed her up to her bedroom, where she was crying into one of her old teddies. I thought I'd be doing him a favor. It's full of army clothes. People buy that sort of stuff nowadays, don't they? And it'd clear some space. I was trying to be nice. I put my arm around her. "I know Evie," I said. 2 years younger than me and less beaten down. Evie's heart was more open to assault. Still, the coldness of Carl's fury had shocked me. "Fuck him, fuck him, fuck him," she screamed into her teddy. "Say, Evie, shall we see what's in Carl's chest tonight? 3 a.m.? She looked at me with vengeful, red-rimmed eyes and nodded. I played on her heightened emotions a little, I'll admit it, but the way Carl reacted had me worried about what he had in the chest. If it was anything that could endanger my mom or Evie, I had to know. The evening passed, and I read for an hour before surrendering my mobile phone. I said goodnight to Carl and my mom, and only got one response. It's not worth pointing out who ignored me and who replied. I climbed the stairs and closed my bedroom door. It was far too early to sleep, despite what Carl thought, so I read by my lamp light every night until my eyes got tired. The only thing to be wary of were slow creaking noises that might indicate Carl was creeping up the stairs. Reading in bedrooms was also banned, and publicly, neither me or Evie did it. However, Carl had his suspicions, so he climbed with stealth to a certain point on the stairs to check for a glow beneath either of our bedroom doors. If he saw a light, he'd burst into the room hoping to catch us. Therefore, I'd switch off the lamp and pretend to be asleep at the sound of any unusual noise. Once a military man, always a military man, I guess. Carl had spent a decade in the Army as an engineer. He'd been deployed multiple times, but never to an active theater of war. Bowing to his ex-wife's demands, he returned to civilian life a year after Evie's birthday. Everything I'd been able to glean seemed to indicate Carl had enjoyed his time in the military. The problem is that he never talks about it. He smiles absently and his eyes go somewhere far away. What had he seen? What had he done? I woke to a gentle tapping on the door. It was time. "Follow my steps," Evie whispered. She charted the least creaky path down the stairs, it seemed. We reached the stone slabs of the kitchen floor and gently opened the basement door, careful of squealing hinges. I closed the door behind us and turned on the flickering light. Pressing against the dusty, cobweb-ridden walls, we descended. The basement itself was cramped and filled with tools, shelves, bicycles, shoes, and boxes. Evie pulled a picnic blanket off a bulky mass to reveal a mahogany chest that was curiously dust-free. "He comes down here most nights, you know," she said. "Why?" Evie shrugged and nudged a coded padlock. "Shit, do you know the code?" I said. "Maybe," Evie said, before twisting 4 numbers into the padlock. It clicked open. "Dad's Army serial number. It's full of Army crap, so I assumed that'd be it." "How do you know it's full of Army crap?" I asked. "He told me once, duh, or at least I think he did." The lid was heavier than we expected. It was 4 inches thick and must have been full of lead. I heaved at one side and Evie heaved at the other until we got it up. Inside, there were no dog tags, no boots. It was empty, except for 2 objects, a long black cushion and a human jawbone. "Who's there?" Evie and I stared at each other, then back at the jawbone. "Boy, girl, speak." "Can you hear a voice?" I asked Evie. "Yeah, this isn't Army stuff. I don't know what this is." I heard a hollow laugh before the voice continued. "He wouldn't have told you about me, for he slew me a long time ago, upon a field far from here." "I don't like it," Evie said. "Who killed you?" I asked the bone. "Her father." "My dad wouldn't kill anyone." "That's a lie," Evie wailed. "Shh, you'll waken them," I whispered. "I don't like this. He comes here every night to pray and beg and weep, just as his spawn does. He's certain it was an accident, a firing range mishap, nothing more. Do you believe him? Might he do it again?" "I hate this," Evie said, and went to close the lid, but I held her back, chewing my lip. "Are we in danger?" I asked, and that chilly laugh rattled through my head again. Evie broke my grip and lunged for the jawbone perched on the black cushion. "You dare to touch me?" The chest lid slammed shut on Evie's right arm, halfway along the bicep, shattering the bone. She let out half a scream before passing out and sliding down the side of the chest. A grisly grinding sound came from her trapped arm as it twisted further. A cold sweat burst out all over my body and I sprang into action, heaving Evie's body back up from where she'd fallen. "Let her out! Let her out!" The voice had ceased to reply. Summoning all my strength, I squatted down and pressed the lip up. It wouldn't budge. I adjusted my grip and pushed with everything. A dark centimeter grew into 2, then 3, then 4. I glimpsed at the grinning bone perched on the black velvet before Evie's mangled arm was free and she slid back onto the basement floor. I helped her up the basement stairs, fully intending to wake my mom and Carl up because Evie needed to go to the hospital. She was delirious and muttering. When we emerged, she looked at me, her face white as chalk. "Run up the stairs. I was sleepwalking. I fell," she said. It took me a moment to realize what she was doing. Carl would question my role in her daughter's injury. Despite her agony, she hatched a plan to protect me from his wrath. I nodded and went up the stairs as loud as I could before dashing into my bedroom and closing the door. I leapt into bed just as Evie started yelling from the foot of the stairs. Today has been quiet with everyone at the hospital. At some point, I'll go to the basement and cover the chest with a picnic blanket and sweep some dust around to hide any footprints. I just don't feel like it yet. I'm quite happy rocking back and forth in my bed for now, thinking, what the fuck happened last night?